Hello, and welcome to episode 20 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. This is John Denning in Los Angeles.
And this is Dave Killorn in Napa Valley.
How are you?
I am tired after yesterday.
Understatement of July. Yeah, I'm running on just a few, winking minutes of sleep.
You know,
doesn't show signs of improving.
I thought it was going to be a long day, and it turned out to be far longer than either of us expected. I know you were up until 4 a.m.
That's right.
So that's insanity.
Well, insanity is that for every Reddit response or email answered, I got 3 back. So
it was like a hydra.
Yeah,
you cut
that's
off
right.
one head, and more just pop into place. It was wow.
That's a good way to describe it. What do you got on tap? What are you drinking?
This one's easy, although I did have to go to the store to obtain the Bass. In honor of the duality of both yesterday's paper to digital transition, as well as the weirdness surrounding the logical reasoning section and some of the uncertainty there, I am drinking a black and tan, which is Bass ale at the bottom half of the glass, and then you layer Guinness on top of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. What about you?
Those are pretty good, actually. I like a good black and tan.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday felt more like a dark and stormy to me, but yeah, I feel you.
That would have been a good call. I maybe missed out there on that.
Well, I got us covered on both fronts. I'm going to do something slightly unusual through this episode. Aside from try not to fall asleep, I have actually made 2 different drinks. We're going to start off talking a little bit about the rollout of tablets. So in honor of yesterday's tablet experience, I've made a frozen drink.
Are you foreshadowing part of our discussion there?
Yeah. That's not ominous. I don't know what to say. This is pretty uncharacteristic for me. I don't drink a lot of sweet drinks. I don't drink a lot of fruity frozen drinks. But I was able to dig out some margarita mix and some pretty bottom shelf tequila upstairs and find a blender. So I've got a frozen margarita here. I'll choke it down.
What?
That's the best I can do.
Welcome to my world, man. Sweetness with drinks. It's the way to go.
I'm sweet enough.
So what's the other drink then?
The other drink for the end of this, and we do get to talk a little bit about LR and some of the craziness there, is a little more straightforward. I figured I'd just have a mixed drink. Specifically, I've got a gin and tonic slowly melting over here to the side.
Nice.
That's more of a classic, although tonic's even a little sweet for me.
Tonic's too sweet for you?
Yeah, a little. Yeah. Tonic's got a lot of sugar in it, man. Have you ever looked at it?
No. Why would I? I just drink it.
Diabetes? I don't know. It's gross.
This is 2 episodes in a row you've accused me of descending into the diabetic coma.
I'm worried about your feet.
I'll be okay, man.
No, you're still in pretty good shape. I'm not that worried about you. But, yeah, we'll find a way to tie in all of these drink references as we go. It'll make more sense as we get into it.
Let's hope so. Let's tie in our musical reference on this.
Let's do it. This is a song that you dug up. I think it's perfect.
Yes, and I'd at least like to share some of the choices that we didn't select. Controversy by Prince. That was certainly in the forefront of my mind. It's the End of the World as We Know It by R.E.M. That certainly passed through.
God, this has gone bleak very quickly.
It's okay.
Straight out of the gate.
We'll explain why we feel this way. And then I finally settled on OK Go's It's a Disaster.
Yeah.
In part because the opening lyrics are talking about crashing and burning, and I think we saw that a few times yesterday. Not by test takers so much as by LSAC. So...
Yeah, in a number of instances. I mean, on the whole, what I've seen from test takers has really been pretty remarkably resilient. And there have been some instances here that would have frustrated me a lot more than I saw from people online. And that's a real testament, I think, to just the fortitude and mentality of this. So if you were someone who we will mention in just a minute, not by name, but by event, keep your chin up. It's going to work out. So far, so good. I've seen a lot of, stiff upper lip.
There's a lot of uproar after the test, but by and large, I thought people kept it together pretty well. And maybe the fact that the way LSAC set this up with the free repeat if you canceled was their form of inoculation for this happening. In a sense, I think they knew there were going to be problems, and they wanted to make sure that they were in a good position after the test to say, look, if you had a problem, this is one of those exams where we've already built in all these features that you're going to like score preview and the ability to basically retake the test for free if you cancel. So
yeah, a lot of highlights and incentivizations to this. I think part of it, too, is a lot of people walking out, having had a bad experience, entered it with so much just ambivalence about the whole thing. Not ambivalence in the sense that they didn't care how they do, but there were just so much unpredictable at the outset yesterday. But I think when more unpredictability occurred, it was just par for the course.
It really was.
That's a theory of mine.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's stop theorizing. Let's start talking about it.
Let's do it.
Let's get right to what happened with yesterday's transitional digital LSAT.
Yeah, we usually start these with a week in the LSAT world, but
This is the
week in the LSAT world. So yeah, let's talk about the July test.
Nothing else matters.
Would have been another good song.
Yeah, I was singing that. All right, let's talk about the rollout.
Whoa. Jinx.
Echo me, man.
There you go.
So what do we know about what happened in terms of them rolling this out to various centers?
Well, the big picture stuff has been well established for a while. It was going to be a 50-50 administration. It was going to be a blind administration. In other words, you weren't going to see or know your test format beforehand. And it was going to be, as we talked about in our Crystal Ball webinar, we thought pretty well distributed, small centers and big with tablets, rural areas and more metropolitan, and ditto paper, that we thought there'd be a pretty good mix.
And there was.
And that's exactly what
was borne out.
Yeah. In fact, just today, LSAC's released some more information about the digital test centers that I thought was interesting. Of the 450 centers apparently in use for this test, that's a lot, 203, so a little less than half, got the digital test.
Which is pretty reasonable size in terms of like wanting a sample and a comparison. But more paper, hard to see exactly how many test takers that comprised. Maybe the 203 centers actually was 50% of the test takers.
Right.
So we can't really see. Obviously, 225 would have been at exactly 50%. So 203 is pretty close.
Yeah. And they'd always talked about doing it 50-50 in terms of attendance, not in terms of location. So
exactly.
I think you're probably right about that. So thus far in, so far so good. They mailed out the tablets, they sent out the paper, they think they know what's going on, and then test day starts.
Were there problems, John?
We should have cued some like heavy organ music, right?
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. Were there problems? Yes.
There were so many.
There were so many problems. And I think maybe the way to do this is just to run categorically through some of the different bigger picture events that occurred and then talk about within them the specifics.
Exactly. So let's start off with the basic check-in problems that we heard about really from across the country.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the tablet process is supposed to be seamless, and sometimes it was. Mm-hmm. There were certainly people who were like, oh, I got right in. But, for example, there were situations where the check-in process took an hour or two.
Yeah.
And that was because they couldn't get the tablet to get the information synced up the way it's supposed to be, or immediately. Or maybe they didn't have enough people. They might have 2 people trying to check in 150, and if the process was slowed down, those poor souls were just standing there waiting. So
yeah, it's like a line at Disney or something. You're stuck till you reach the front, basically. I saw some reports in various places yesterday of up to 3 hours from the time they got to the test center to the time they were actually in the room taking it. That means if you get there at 12:30, you're starting the test around 3:30. That is brutal.
It's rough. That's a long wait, and certainly a huge loss of energy. Completely changes the situation. I mean, even you talked about blood sugar earlier. It changes that situation. If somebody's monitoring that and has an actual problem, they have to be watching things like that. To me, when I look at a successful test administration, it's easy to overlook the idea, well, it took a while to check in. But to me, that's a problem that needs identification and fixing.
Yeah. I wonder how many people ate their test break snack, just waiting in line before they could even get there.
More than one.
I'm sure that that's the case. In fact, I was getting texts and emails from people at the test center, and now this seems like violation. They had so much time, they went back and just sat in their car and listened to music and were talking to friends on the phone that they left in the car.
That's exactly right. Telling us what was going on with, I can't get in, the line's not moving, It's like a traffic jam on the freeway.
I've been here an hour and a half and they're about halfway through, that kind of thing.
Which is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Honestly, going forward. And again, LSAT can say, well, we knew there were going to be problems, that's why we set this up with a free retake. But this is still a real LSAT. People still paid $200 to take it.
That's right.
It is not fair to have problems like this and to not have prepared for it properly, because there were well, let's just keep going. Other issues.
Yeah, they keep touting this free retake thing that you can do in October. I talked to a couple students who were like, dude, I'm doing a study abroad next semester. I'm not going to be able to take an LSAT. I'm on a
going to
boat.
be in school. I got stuff going on. I took it now because it's the summertime and I don't have as many conflicts.
That's right. So you finally are in the room, whatever time that was. Maybe 12:30, 12:40, maybe 2:30. And then they start to hand out the content. Now, if it's a paper test, business as usual. Mostly talk about. But one of the first things that was missing in a number of places, something that was guaranteed for the tablet testers, was that little pen/stylus that they give.
Yeah, and not just one isolated incident. This happened at multiple test centers where no stylus was given. Now, that could have been because no styluses. It could be either. I checked this earlier.
Oh, you did? Okay, good.
I did, yes. Either is acceptable. It could be that they weren't sent to the test center. But it also could have been that the proctor was like, what? I thought, it's a tablet. I don't need to give these out.
Yeah, they're sitting in a closet somewhere at the front desk.
Yeah, either way, there were multiple places where they were like, yeah, sorry, just use your finger. Now, it's nice. It works. Your finger, that is. But if you've been promised a stylus and it's got a pen built into it that you were thinking about using, and maybe you're just more comfortable with it, maybe you practiced with the stylus beforehand, this is an unacceptable disruption.
Yeah.
LSAC said you'd get a stylus. You should get a stylus.
And for the longest time, the rule was that you had to use this pen. So I talked to a lot of people that are like, I didn't know I could take a pencil. I was just waiting for them to hand me this pen. They didn't have any pens. So they're scrambling around the room, begging favors from fellow students, sending proctors to purses, that kind of thing.
Frustrating.
I would say so. And again, is that the biggest issue of the day? You could still take the tests at that point.
Well, if you did not bring a pencil with you, and to be honest,
find one to borrow or something.
You should have. If you're listening to what we talk about before this test, you should have brought your own pencils.
Sure.
But if you didn't, all of a sudden you're in a scramble because you're like, I don't have the pen to do logic games, and it's a panic. And nobody needs a panic right before the actual test is about to start.
Especially if you've already been there for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
This comedy of errors escalates.
Compounding errors.
That's right.
Yeah, you can imagine some tempers were flaring at that point.
So you're in the room. Let's say you have a stylus or you've bummed a pencil. And then you get the tablet as they're handing this out.
Actually, let me throw something in here because at least it relates to the stylus thing. And I know we're going to talk about proctoring issues later on.
Sure.
But some proctors were telling students you can't use a pencil, which was demonstrably false and against what LSAC had publicly said. And so you had students getting into arguments right at the beginning of the test before it's even started because they're like, no, I get to use a pencil. And in one center, I think the proctor said, okay, you can do it this time.
Right.
As if they were granting some favor. I'm like, I paid for this.
There were several places, though. Yeah, it's completely reasonable, mostly because it's on LSAT's website right now that they're allowed. Big, bold letters, you can bring a pencil.
But you're not supposed to have your phone, so you can't look it up and show the proctor, who's clearly clueless, what the deal is.
You're not allowed to show them on your phone because you can't have a phone. The tablets you're sitting there holding, you can't use those. All they do is, maybe, if you're lucky, display the test.
Maybe.
And so you've got to find a proctor willing to pull his or her phone out and go look this up and then admit that they're wrong. It's a tall order, man.
It's a big ask at that point.
More about proctors in a bit because that was far from their only offense.
Yes, it was.
But assuming you've made your way past all these hurdles, they give you the tablet. Yeah, and now you're ready. You're finally like, all right, zoned back in. The test is about to start. Maybe.
So what happens at that point in some of these poor centers?
Poor as in OOR.
The operative word.
Yeah, as in, right. We're a poor center right now, but yesterday it was just unfortunate. What happened in at least 2 places, and we don't have full reports, and frankly, the week's not done. Yesterday was the first day of, I think, 4 or 5 over the course of this week that are going to have tests running. We'll talk a little more about that in a bit. But at least 2 centers, both in Florida, had such issues syncing the tablets to the main control hub that the proctor has, that after, I think, an hour and then 2.5 hours, respectively, they just gave up, sent everybody home.
Yeah, in Lakeland, Florida, which is outside of Tampa, it was an hour.
East, I think, yeah.
And then closer to Tampa proper, I think actually at the Cooley campus down in Florida, they had a 2.5-hour issue, and finally they just couldn't get it to work. And after consulting with LSAC, who said they had an emergency meeting, that's what they told the students in the room, they would send them home, and that they would later on send an email out and reschedule.
We'll be in touch.
We'll be in touch is what it said. And they got the email out the same day, and we'll talk a little bit about those options because it affected more than a few students.
Yeah, but poor Florida, man. I say that a lot in general, but in this case.
Florida man showed up and messed up the LSAT.
How did Florida man manage to proctor 2 different centers 40 miles apart simultaneously?
With a lot of skill.
A lot of skill.
The interesting thing, though, was obviously this had happened early on. The students who came out of Lakeland immediately went out into the world and started complaining on social media. And so you started to see this disastrous situation unfolding. And then the Tampa students came in, and they had a similar problem. And early on, it looked like it could be a pretty bad day for LSAC.
Yeah. These are 2 East Coast centers, so you start hearing about them first thing.
Yeah. It looks like it is a Wi-Fi issue where they did not have powerful enough Wi-Fi to support the system and the supervisor hub and syncing with all the tablets at once. Bad Wi-Fi is a fact of life right now. It's not like we have these super powerful networks everywhere. So LSAC has got to know this is the case and that there's going to be similar problems going forward. So it's a concern to me when I hear things like, well, the Wi-Fi wasn't good enough. That's what they were told in one of the centers. I'm like, weak, dude.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. Part of this, too, is just a massive bandwidth. Let's say you got 50 people in a room, 50 tablets, 1 control hub up front. The way this is supposed to work is that every 10 seconds on every one of these tablets, it syncs its data, in other words, what you've done to that point, with the control hub and stores it. There's a ton of information being broadcast back and forth.
And a constant flow of information.
That's right.
You don't get to have a little dead zone for, a period of time. It's got to be constantly doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, you go every 3 minutes, for instance, and something breaks, you might lose half a logic game. You might lose, 4 logical reasoning questions.
So, obviously, that was a huge problem. Now, it's really interesting because in the press release that LSAC put out about this, where they touted the massive success of this, they said something that, to me, I think was kind of interesting about the experience that they had. And I'm gonna read it here. I actually have to go find it. This was from their chief information officer, who's a nice guy, by the way. And so I think this is just corporate talk. We are pleased that 99.3% of the test takers who were registered at digital test centers were able to complete the test. But we won't be satisfied until that number is 100%, which I think is great. I mean, you shouldn't be satisfied until it's 100%.
For sure.
But the interesting thing here is what's the definition of able to complete the test, and what does that really include? Because there's a big difference between, all right, I got through it, and it took me 3 hours on the front to register in, and then we had problems with the tablet, and things like that. I think that those problems should be included. And if we did include those problems, that 99.3% would plunge.
Yeah. We were talking about this earlier, and I kind of gave the example of it'd be like saying 99% of the soldiers survived the battle. And then you survey the battlefield, and you're like, all those people there got shot, though. And look, that guy's still on fire. And that guy lost a leg. He'll never walk again. That's what this feels like. So yeah, if you want to talk about pure casualties in terms of death, less than 1%, congratulations. If you want to talk about overall trauma, if you want to talk about unnecessary suffering, watch that percentage plummet.
I wonder what the actual percentage is of, the so-called problem
without
centers.
A hitch kind of test?
The clean centers versus, any type of problem. I wonder if it's 50-50 along those lines.
I'd be surprised if it was that high. I don't know that we got quite enough screaming online to make me think it was half the people faced an issue. But God knows we did hear from a lot of...
There was
and
a
we're
lot.
Not done, by the way. This isn't just 2 centers couldn't test. It was...
I don't know if it was 50% were problematic, but it certainly was not 0.7%. It was at a minimum at least 20%, in my opinion, that had issues of one sort or another, and likely much higher.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I will say this, though, is kind of like an interjection. They kind of knew this was going to happen, I think. They knew there were going to be problems. That's why this test was built up with so many advantages in terms of score preview and the free repeat, is because now they have the ability to say, hey, you're not dead on this. You're going to get to see your score, and then you can determine whether or not you want to keep or cancel it. So they are set in terms of having a built-in inoculation or defense against these issues that occurred.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about some tablet issues too. I'll preface some of this, Dave, and I think you know this, although we haven't talked about it in a while. These are not the same tablets that they used for their pilot tests,
Right.
when they actually courted an audience to come do this thing for real. I took the first one, and it was a small, like 7-inch, 8-inch Samsung tablet.
Mm-hmm.
They used the same Samsung tablet for the next pilot test months later. And then all of a sudden, they've switched to these bigger Microsoft Surface Gos, and they're running into issues. One wonders.
Yeah, I'm not going to make any comment about Microsoft since I'm not a tech guy in that sense, but
I just make a hardware comment in general, is that you're going to run your first major operation on stuff that you've literally
used before.
Failed to test twice?
I'll just leave that one alone. I think it speaks for itself. But we weren't done with the tablet problems just from the description. It wasn't just that a couple centers got nuked and couldn't actually have the test. There were problems.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, you know what's funny is we still haven't even started the test yet.
So the next problem they ran into is that, and this one stunned me when I heard it. Just the first time I heard it, I was like, what? And then I heard it multiple times.
Oh, no.
They had tablets that hadn't been charged. And in multiple instances, they brought in tablets where it's like, oh, this doesn't have a charge to it, won't start up. And now there is the ability to charge tablets there, but I think it's maxed out at 10 or so. So
yeah, it depends on how many little charged cords, cables they sent. It wasn't many.
Why are you walking in with tablets uncharged when it's the beginning of the test? And this isn't 5 years in where a tablet could die or have a battery problem. This is day one of the new world, and you are showing an inattentiveness to some of the most basic issues out there. To me, I really feel like whoever was running the operations on this needs to take a long, hard look at systemically what they're doing, because this is unacceptable, in my opinion, for something to show up like this and not be ready to go. They should have been 100% charged, shipped straight out from wherever the shipping center is, no problems.
Yeah, this isn't a long-term relationship where they've earned some credibility, some forgiveness from a suffering partner. This is a first date, and I promise they would not get asked out again.
There's so many things I want to say about my first date with LSAT.
Yeah, we didn't make it past the appetizers, is how this feels to me.
I had to call a friend. Hey, call me really quick and say there's an emergency so I can leave. Right. I'm out.
Yeah, that's right. So, in some cases, students literally got stood up, poor Floridians. Most other instances, though, the issues that we saw had to do with the hardware and the software itself in the moment in the testing process. So, now you have a tablet that has a charge. Now you can start the test, sort of. And this is where, over and over and over, and this was, to me, the most common sort of complaint that I heard, was that the tablets kept freezing, or stalling, or in some cases just outright failing. There were several that just shut off.
Mm-hmm.
And they did have a contingency for this. You know this. They sent backup tablets to every center that was going to be digital. And so proctors, I would love to have been just a fly on the wall in these rooms to watch the mad scramble as hands go up to report problems and tablets are in circulation. Because you know that's what it was. You know that this was like a scurry with just proctors and tablets under their arms.
I'd freak out.
40-yard dashes. Yeah.
If it froze and I was like, there's an issue, yeah, I can raise my hand and be like, Proctor, can you come see me? But during that whole time, I'm freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
How
Am I going to lose my work? How much time is this going to take? For the most part, the replacements, whether it was once, twice, I heard somebody had to replace theirs 3 different times.
Quality hardware there.
Yeah. It eventually got sorted out. Eventually, and again, 99% of people were able to finish. Eventually, most of the people kind of limped their way to the end of this thing.
Although they ran out of backups in a few places.
I know of at least one center, I think a couple probably, where so many people had to have their tablets replaced that as future tablets started to fail, they didn't have any more backups, and they just started sending those people home.
I have no words for that. And again, that's
Yes, you do.
It's yeah, you're right, I do. What am I saying? I just can't speak them right here and right
That's
now
right.
and
There
keep
could be
this
children
PG-13-ish. It's going to go from R to X pretty quickly.
You have words. I've heard them. But
I was swearing a blue streak yesterday while talking to people. I was like, what the?
Oh, come on. Yeah. But again, those glitches, LSAC knew some of this was going to happen. I just wish they had put better contingencies in place. Give them more charging points. Send more tablets to these places. Or, my favorite of all and the easiest of all, send paper tests along with the tablets in case the tablets fail, like in Florida.
Exactly.
That would have been such an easy swap. Like, hey guys, we're going to do tablets. We can't make them work. Sorry to keep you sitting here 2 hours. The good news is you get a test type that you're familiar with. Here's your booklet. Here's your paper.
Same as it ever was.
Yeah.
Good luck. Let's go.
Sorry none of you brought pencils. That kind of.
But we went to the store while we were waiting and bought you some nice Ticonderoga blacks.
I have a box of them sitting a foot from me. They're the best pencils in the world.
Things that never happen with a proctor during the LSAT. Yes, you do actually have those pencils. I think they're high quality.
Yeah, they're great.
I'm a fan.
So, yeah, I mean, this was just incessant, ongoing. One of my students actually emailed me after the test, and I'll very briefly read his summation of this. Went pretty good, blah, 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 even giving me scale predictions, which I always appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And, quote, and then there was section 5, and this is one of the craziest tablet freakouts. This is like demonic possession style. My tablet began glitching in the middle of section 5, jumping randomly from question to question, even selecting answers for me when I was not touching the screen or even hovering a stylus close to it. I raised my hand, a proctor came over and pretty quickly swapped me for a new tablet that supposedly saved all my prior work. This is where it gets extra bad. However, when I finished the section and went back to check a few of the earlier questions, I found at least one where the selected answer was not the answer that I had selected before the glitching began.
So, you think this is going to become known as the LSAT ghost?
That's right.
The ghost in the machine.
Yeah. The ghost of paper test pass.
I know you wanted to select B there, but C is what I prefer.
What if it changed it to the right answer, though?
Yeah. What do you think the chances are of that?
Yeah, 20%? The friendly LSAT ghost.
Yeah, there's no such thing.
No.
And, you know, there were other issues, too, with this kind of, like, freezing and glitching. We heard numerous reports of problems highlighting parts of the text, that it didn't work well or was inaccurate or sometimes just wouldn't work at all.
You couldn't, the tablet wasn't registering your touches with finger or stylus. A lot of people were saying the highlighting would either select a whole paragraph or at times send them to a different question, which the buttons to go question to question aren't even near the highlight part or the passages. I have no idea.
It's really impossible to speak to unless you are watching it happen live and you're experiencing it. Hopefully their hub recorded the hardware activity of things like that, because that's the real problem. You know, it's easy to watch something work well, but sometimes it's really difficult to get it to replicate a problem. It's like going in with your car and you're like, it's making this weird sound. Of course, when you get to the mechanic, it will not make that sound.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, what's the problem, sir? I don't know. I'm an idiot. So it's the same kind of thing here. Hopefully they're able to go back and replicate it and track down where the problem is. But this was a massive rollout. We knew there were going to be problems. I mean, this is not a big surprise to, I think, anybody who studies this kind of thing. There's just too many people with too new of a platform, with untested hardware and software at this level. There was going to be issues.
Yeah, I mean, the safety net's there for this exact reason, frankly.
Now, the interesting thing is that's all technical, you know, in a sense. It's all tablet, it's all software, it's all stylus related. But, of course, the troubles didn't stop there.
Of course
there were others.
Of course not. Yeah, there was human error involved in some of this, too. You already mentioned one where a lot of proctors were adamant that you couldn't use a pencil for your scratch booklet on a digital test, which is just flat out wrong. Now, it's newly wrong. There was a time when that was true. But they should know better. What are some more proctor issues? This happened at every paper center that I'm familiar with, is the proctor still had the old proctoring, call it what you want, annotations.
Checklist.
Guidelines, scripts, basically. And so at the end of the paper tests, the proctors stand there and they read this disclaimer statement that outlines the cancellation process.
You have 6 days.
And, as always has been the case, they told all the paper people, you have to cancel in the next 6 days or your score is permanent.
Except that's not true anymore.
Well, it's not true this time.
Yeah, it's not true this time.
In this
anymore.
one unique case, that is not true at all. And it freaked a ton of people out. I can't tell you how many people messaged me yesterday. Be like, tell me the proctor's wrong. And I was like, as though you even need me to say it.
Oh, I had a conversation online where the students were saying, but they read this. And I was like, look, it's probably an artifact from before. They're used to saying it. They just had it. Or they have old paperwork. And they're like, no, they read it very carefully. I'm like, that doesn't change what is the possible explanation here. You can read something very carefully, but if it's an old document,
sure,
it's still going to be wrong. And that's what we had going on here.
Yeah, I can read Plato very carefully. That's real old, you know. Plato, not Plato.
I'm like, where are you going with this?
What are you doing with this? You should have said Homer. But, yeah, the idea is, of course, they read it carefully. It's words. It's written down. They're trying to do their job. Unfortunately, they didn't know their job. Not this time. Because they weren't
trained. It's a tough position for them to be in.
Oh, God, I felt awful for proctors. Except for one guy who's probably my favorite proctor now.
Yeah, still this story.
Yeah. There's a lot of students knew better, or at least thought they did. This has been a well-established reason to take this test for both format types, regardless of the type of test you get. You can cancel after you see your score and get a free repeat. So this 6-day thing used to be true. It'll be true again, I suspect, in September, but right now it's false. And a lot of paper students, in hearing this, started to murmur loudly and started to give the proctors some pushback and grief, correctly. My favorite story yesterday, as reported online, was one girl said her proctor just threw his hands up and goes, listen, guys, I'm just the idiot who stands up here and reads what they tell me. Perfect.
If someone can find out who that guy is, I will buy him a drink.
Happily, yeah.
You know, I credit to somebody who's like frustrated by the fact that they're the middleman in this system and they don't have the right information. They're reading something that has always been the case, and all of a sudden, half or more of the room is like, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And getting militant about it, as they should.
Yeah,
what do you think's going to happen? I mean, that poor guy, credit to him.
It's as good as you can handle it. A lot of proctors at that point go into pure, like, imperious Caesar mode. And they're like, this is what it is because I said this. Like,
bureaucratic warlords.
That's right.
Or, really my favorite, the can I speak to the manager haircut type of person.
Yeah.
Can I speak to your manager, please?
I love that haircut.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So that was a big issue with proctors too. Now, granted, that's just the dissemination of misinformation. And after the fact. It didn't impact people testing. They got the correct information. I mean, dude, just fingers crossed no one took that to heart and didn't know better and is canceling today. Because that would be a real shame.
It really would. There is no reason at all to cancel your score. Wait until August 28th, see how you did, then cancel if you need to, or keep it as the case may be. Do not cancel for any reason right now. There is no possible explanation why you wouldn't, unless you walked out of the center after 5 minutes and they'd actually started your test, unlike in Florida.
Or after 2 hours, unlike in Florida.
Well, there were other proctor problems too, even with the digital test, where it's supposed to be like, okay, human error is taken away. That wasn't the case. There were issues with proctors starting things early, and so people lost time. Sometimes they were supposed to pause it, and they didn't. And so students would come back and be like, I just lost 15 seconds in the last section.
Yeah, I think a lot of people didn't realize that the tablets aren't entirely self-automated. They're governed by the people in the room, despite the fact that they then run to the end of the section on their own, presuming they don't freeze. So proctors read a set of directions at the beginning. Ready, guys? Here we go. Start. Problem is, in a number of places, proctors hit that start button while they were still reading the directions. And the students didn't realize that the clock was running. Look down, and a minute's gone by of their 35 or whatever. And they start freaking out. Dude, what are you doing? The clock. Pause the test. And you can pause the test. But apparently you can't reset it. Which means that minute's just gone.
Yeah, great.
Now, if you're somewhat clever and industrious, what you do is be like, all right, guys, I'm going to count this minute off. I'm going to watch it on my watch, and then I'll resume the test after this minute's been made up. That would be a way to do it. But again, the bureaucracy in this, it's tough.
Is that even possible now that I think about it?
What do you mean?
Well, it's funny because that was my initial thought too. Like if I was Mr. Cool Proctor, I'd be like, all right, I screwed up.
I'm just the idiot up here pressing buttons.
I'm just the idiot pressing buttons and reading directions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys the minute back. So I'll just leave it paused and I'll count it, on my stopwatch or whatever, my regular watch. But what if that thing, when it's paused, more or less closes down? Like you can't swipe to the next question or you can't even read the screen. I don't know what it does specifically. So I wonder if it's possible.
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? You would think if it paused, it freezes it because you wouldn't want to have the time not running while students can look around.
You definitely can't go to other questions, but I don't think it freezes it in a way where it's like, here, go ahead and read your question.
Yeah. Guys, I'm going to freeze you all on question 1 for a minute. I don't think you can do that.
I don't think so.
So anyway, and again, is it the end of the world? No. But is it the kind of $200 test experience you deserve? No.
Is it the kind of my future is on the line and this is a high stakes environment and I need to do as well as possible kind of experience you deserve? Absolutely not. And that's where 99.3% is, yeah, I get you. You're trumpeting that as if it's a massive success, but it's not really accurate.
Yeah, I think it's also not accurate because it's not true.
Yeah. I don't think we're buying it, especially if you open up the so-called casualties argument where problems creep into this.
Just think about 0.07 or 007, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's only about 100 people if 14,000 got the tablet. You're telling me only 100 people, based off everything we heard yesterday, couldn't finish?
It seemed like there was more than that in the Florida centers, but you know what? I'll just leave it for whatever they say.
I don't know, but it seems fishy.
The broader point is that just applies to they were able to successfully complete the test. Successfully complete is an incredibly vague robo-corporate speak term to use in this kind of thing. This is actually really
standard.
Well, it's real people literally suffering in the middle of this. They're already dealing with anxiety and pressure, and they've studied for months. They've worked themselves up to this exact point, and no, we're going to stand in line for 2 hours.
Yeah.
It really, really chafes me when I read stuff like that because it's so self-congratulatory. And I've said many times, I think the LSAT itself is an amazingly well-made test, and I have the highest degree of respect for the abilities of the people who put this test together and how well they've done it over the years. But I don't love the corporate speak where it's like, oh, it was so successful. It really wasn't that incredibly successful, and there were serious problems that need to be addressed. And I will now step back out of the pulpit and relax for half a second.
No, you just have the world's largest choir is what you have. For good reason.
It's actually physically making me angry here.
No.
I need to go get another drink. It's upsetting me when I think about it because, the one thing that we never see is talking about like, well, was the experience for the students as good as possible?
Right.
And in some cases, yes.
Yeah.
As we'll talk about. There were successful completions of this and there were places where it worked great. But
yeah, I'm like flashing back to yesterday, PTSD. I'm sitting here drinking a frozen margarita with the AC on, and I'm sweating because this makes me so uncomfortable what happened to me.
Let's keep on going because I know we want to get to the test itself.
Yeah,
that's where the cool stuff is.
Again, these are things specific to largely the digital test, or at least kind of the environment around July. But these weren't the only issues.
There's always external issues that pop up that are problems. And these are the ones actually where I say LSAC isn't to blame for these. Mostly. Mostly. Calgary had, I think, a center where there were 2 fire alarms. So the first one sent everybody out, and then as they were walking back in, the second one went off. And so the proctor sent everybody home. And that's understandable. LSAT can't control a fire alarm.
They can't. So I still wonder why they weren't able to finish, because they were in or through Section 3 by then, which is just a double gut punch.
Was there something going on that we don't know about
like,
where it was an
this
imminent?
Has screwed the timing up too much or didn't too disrupt? We think there might be more. I don't know.
I remember at the University of Southern California years ago, there was a fire alarm. People were outside for an hour, and then the power went off. And they just basically kept them chained there. And then when it all came back, they stuck them back in the room, and they finished the test. So, and I think Calgary was a paper center as well.
Yeah, that was a paper test. So those people were feeling double lucky, I think. They got a paper test. Things are cruising along. They're really 60% or whatever through it.
Yeah.
And then they're not allowed to finish.
Yeah. And there's issues like that. At Windsor University, also up in Canada. There was construction going on outside for like the first 45 minutes of the test where, they're using jackhammers. This kind of thing, this story is legion. You hear about this all the time. Marching bands, construction, fire alarms, power outages. These are acts of, really forces of nature that you just can't anticipate. So I understand that kind of thing happening. Although the last one that we heard about...
Yeah, and this is where you have to question either the judgment or the research. Because at least one person reported that their test center, they said, quote, shared a wall with an actual physical standalone bar. Like a Moe's Tavern type standalone bar.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so while they're over there trying to concentrate at their tables with their tablets, I think that was a tablet center, the thing next door is like a jukebox and clinking bottles and stuff, which is doubly cruel, frankly. It's distracting, but it's also, you're kind of like rubbing their face in it.
At least you know where you're going after the test's over.
Yeah, and I mean, the break is 15 minutes, so you
get in a few shots really quick.
Yeah, you can get something
done. Fireball.
God.
All right, so this is like a very, very brief overview of many of the different problems that were occurring out there. So let's say, first off, you were at one of these test centers and there was a problem. Mm-hmm. What do? I would say that the first thing to do is report it. Let them know that there was an issue. Make sure that if your proctor didn't report the issue, that they know about it. They need to see the full scope of problems that occurred out there. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's really, there's two time frames in this as I see it. One takes a time machine, unless you haven't tested yet, which is to say if something happens at your test center, report it at the test center. Tell a proctor, flag somebody down, make it known, because they take proctor notes. They have an official record, basically, that they send to LSAC. If you can get that information onto the official record validated by a proctor, it's much easier to approach LSAC and be like, see, what are we going to do about this?
Exactly.
If you didn't do that, or even if you did, frankly, you still need to report it to LSAC directly. And I think that's what you were talking about.
I am, because I've been asked this question, I would say conservatively 15 to 16 times today. Well, I had this problem. And by the way, if anybody has written me on Reddit or Twitter or even our forum, I am buried. I had over 1,000 messages come in yesterday and through today, and I know, John, you had an equal number. So if I haven't responded yet, I do intend to. I am just trying to literally see the light.
Yeah. I wasn't up till 4 a.m. for fun, which is
usually most the case. Times.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I don't mind 4 a.m., but last night was not the 4 a.m. I was hoping for.
One way or the other, report the problem. Let them know that there was an issue. That's actually helpful for them, and it's also helpful for next time. Because one of the things that we're hoping is that they will see these reports and they will take action, and that when the September test takers come in, there will be fewer problems.
Yeah.
So we'll see about that.
Anyone who's listening to this that had, and to me, I think the list of errors that we just outlined would all qualify.
Oh, sure.
Potentially to report. A pro tip in this, too, something I've seen really work for people. You can call LSAC. If you don't get an answer you like, you can call them again. The old thing where you just kind of look for the right customer service person to maybe do things, but don't just take them at their word. A lot of these people really don't know what they're talking about. See if you can get them to send you an email with whatever they tell you if it's favorable. Get it in writing.
As much as you possibly can.
As much as you can. But most of these people, if you're like, listen, I'd really love to have this in an email. Would you mind? Here's my email address. Would you mind just emailing me those, whatever?
Usually, again, it's just corporate speak that is pre-prepared. The one thing that people have asked me is, will they do anything about it? I think in most cases they won't. Because they're already like, you're going to get the free retake and you get to see your score. What more can we offer you? Well, you just paid $200 for something. I'd say a refund is a reasonable request to make in these instances where you have some of these terrible things that have actually occurred. So
maybe some school fee waivers for applications. There's things that didn't come along with this test that you still are on the hook for. Maybe they could give you. July is going to be a particularly tough row to hoe, as it were, because there are so many things that are already built into this test that could have been concessions otherwise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, there is one other classification of people that I do want to address, and that is specifically for people who were in places like Calgary where the test got canceled, or in Florida where the digital tablet would not sync. In those instances, those students walked out without a clear understanding in almost every instance or knowledge of when they'd be next taking the LSAT.
What even happens next? Yeah.
Yeah, in some of those places, they're like, we'll try to get it in before September. Yeah, again, that's bad customer service, number one. So improve your customer service, LSAC. But number two, the typical process here, and this is why this is frustrating for me, is that they try to give a makeup test within 1 to 3 weeks of the actual test.
Yeah.
They've done this many times before. When there were wildfires in Northern California, that's what they did. When there were hurricane problems.
Florida, yeah. Floods
down
in Texas, this over and over.
They set it up so that, 1, 2, 3 weeks later, they'd be like, come back in and take the test. Typically, you take a different test, so you're not going to be taking the same test that you would originally have. But this is a known policy, and I am always surprised. I'm like, why don't you just tell people that? We believe that you'll have a retake within 1 to 3 weeks, but we need to confirm. That sounds so much friendlier and customer service oriented than we think maybe before September we probably can get you in.
Yeah, we'll try for the next 2 months or so. That's.
But this is what you have with an organization that isn't customer service centric. That's not how things should be handled, and they should change. So I'll leave it at that. If you are one of those makeup individuals, I feel bad for you, but that is at least where you're heading. Hopefully you can look at the next couple of weeks and say, all right, more time to study.
Yeah, I mean, it's not all downside. Let me add a couple quick points to that, very quick, because I've been asked some pointed questions about how it's going to work. Like, will I get to pick my new test date? No. They're going to do this. There is no democracy when it comes to makeup tests. They're going to give a date. It'll probably be on a Monday to keep things consistent with this. It'd be weird if they put this on a Saturday or a Sunday now. Could happen. Again, it's LSAC. But
I think you'll see some Saturday shots unless they have to deal with Sabbath day observers.
The Sabbath thing makes me nervous because a lot of people take these Monday tests specifically because of the Sabbath observations or observance. That's number one. Will you take it at the same place? Probably. But they're going to tell you the center. Again, you're not going to get a choice, a list of dates or a list of centers. Will you get the same test that you saw? No. Almost certainly not. It won't be this. Especially Calgary. Forget it. They're not going to give you a test you've already had a chance to work some portion of.
Yeah, and then a lot of times what people say is, what happens if I can't make it?
Yeah.
Usually what they say is you can take the next regularly scheduled LSAT. They will not set you up with a new second makeup date. It's one makeup date. Yeah. Either you make it or you don't. If you don't, you got to take the next regular LSAT, so you'd be looking at September.
Or I guess you could potentially inquire about, like, are there other makeup tests on different dates that I could travel to? But, I mean, that Canada to Florida trip is a rough one, you know?
You don't think Tampa to Calgary is a hot path that people will be beating?
Can I just say this, without insulting too many Floridians, I'd rather take that route than the alternative back.
I love Florida, man.
God.
So
I've never been to Lakeland.
I actually have.
Best I can say.
I've traveled that Tampa to Orlando route multiple times, often in pursuit of concerts and seeing various shows and places down there.
I saw Muse in Tampa years ago.
Yes, you've seen them. I've seen them in Orlando.
Yeah, that was actually pretty awesome. So, all right, Tampa gets a pass.
See, it took me less than a minute to talk you into the fact
that was actually pretty easy.
It's pretty cool.
Pretty easy.
Florida's fantastic.
But you could potentially go to another test site on a different makeup date if the just happens to fall in your favor. But for the most part, if you can't make the makeup, that's it. What they should do for those people, and I'm actually pretty firm on this, you got to give those people a refund.
Oh, yeah.
I think.
Well, what if you're about to head out of the country?
Yeah, not just a free makeup, but a full refund and a free makeup.
What if you're taking a summer semester somewhere and you're like, oh, I'm out?
Yeah.
And you're leaving on Thursday. You're not taking any makeup. At that point, you've just been screwed.
Yeah.
So there better be a full refund at that point.
Yeah, especially given that the Florida people in particular, this inconvenience is solely at the feet of LSAC.
Yeah, they will refund you, by the way, in those instances. We're joking a little bit about the fact that they should, but they will. I know that's for a fact.
And then the final question I've been getting from people, at least on this specific, will we have the same test format? Those Florida people with tablets, are they going to give us tablets again? Calgary's, are they going to get paper again?
They should.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to be paper this next time, frankly. Can you imagine giving tablets again and having the same issue?
No, so they better give them paper.
I can't imagine it, but I have a very dark imagination.
The paper wasn't the problem in Calgary. The tablet was the problem in Florida, so let's go with a format that we know isn't going to be an issue.
That you can control. Yeah. But all of this being said, I'm thinking LSAC has probably learned some valuable lessons and will continue to through this week and through some reports and feedback and stuff. So I anticipate that this is going to be the worst of them. I think September will be better. I think October will be better still. I can't imagine this sort of thing continues at this rate, basically.
Let's hope not.
So, if you do end up retaking, I think, especially if you're one of the problem categories above, you'll have a better experience.
So let's continue on and get out of this, I don't know, morass of problems that we're stuck in at the point.
It's been a little gloomy.
It is, man. It bums me out. So there was an Oprah moment that happened for many people that, surprisingly so, I don't know that I expected this, and I think it was a surprise to the test takers.
I knew it was coming.
Wow, impressive for you. A lot of people were able to take their stylus with them.
Yeah. I knew it because it happened to me when I took the pilot test. They were like, yeah, everybody's going to get a stylus to keep.
So it's that Oprah thing. You get a stylus. You get a stylus. Everyone gets a stylus. And it's like, at first, I thought to myself, that's interesting. Like, why give it away? And then I realized what it was actually saying about the perception of the test takers. Well, now that you've had your dirty hand on it, we're not allowed to let anyone else have their dirty hand on it. Yeah. So you better take it with you. And that made me feel a little bit less positive about what I was seeing there. I was like, oh, they don't. Okay, fine.
You think they'll mail a stylus to the students who didn't get one?
I don't think so.
Yeah, me neither.
They don't get the free stylus. We're going to put ours in the LSAT museum.
This is a pretty bargain basement Oprah, if I'm being honest.
I prefer the car when she gets
those out. Houses and cars. And you get a $3 trinket with LSAC branded all over it.
Yay.
But, I mean, it's not nothing.
No, it's better than nothing. It's not that great, but it's better than nothing. So that was one positive thing that came out. The other positive thing that came out was that there were many people who actually really enjoyed the tablet experience.
Preferred it even.
Yeah, they said that they liked it better. They felt they were able to move more smoothly through it, and that kind of looking at the questions was more comfortable. They could go more quickly from page to page. They were able to bubble in the answers really fast because it's just a tap, and they liked the fast check-in. So they were able to look at all those things from a tablet standpoint itself and say, this actually felt really comfortable. And I don't think that's a big surprise. You have to figure in today's society, people having iPads and what have you, that dealing with a tablet is not that foreign. And in many instances, these were people who were like, oh, I hadn't even tried the interface online to see how the tablet thing worked. This was just, they felt comfortable enough right with it, and they were able to roll.
There's a brief tutorial at the beginning of the actual test, too, so anyone who didn't know how the highlighters worked was shown how they were supposed to work. They didn't always, but there was this information presented up front, too. I also talked to a lot of students. I won't speak for other companies because, well, I can't. But I talked to a lot of our students who had used our digital platform, used our interface going into this, and they were like, absolute lifesaver, godsend, because I was totally comfortable swiping and highlighting and collapsing answers and things.
And they understood how it worked, the flagging and what have you, which are basic functions in the world of testing online. But if you haven't dealt with it before in this particular environment, you want to actually be comfortable with it beforehand. And it's something that for all of our full LSAT course students or live online students, for example, they have access to this.
Yeah.
The one other thing I'll note is that we had talked about scratch paper before the test, and we've been asked many times about this, and we thought it was going to be somewhere between, like, say, 10 to 14, 10 to 16 pages. It looks like it was 14 pages, and unlined as we knew it would be, but that's more than enough scratch paper for a single test. So anybody who's like, I wonder if there was enough, there was.
There was plenty.
Yeah, I didn't hear any complaints about the amount of scratch paper.
Yeah, what I took away from this yesterday, incorporating the positives with some of the rest, is that it was very hit or miss. It was very luck of the draw. I called it like LSAT Russian roulette, basically. You just spin the wheel and click. But
LSAT casino.
There it is, yeah, in your nice phrase. But I also got the sense that there's a lot of potential here. That these tablets really do have the ability to not only, like, provide certain advantages, but to provide enough advantages where they could ultimately, I think, be favorable to the paper experience.
In the long run, yeah.
In the long run. I mean, a faster check-in when they eventually get that figured out. It's going to be great.
Look, in 3 years, if somebody were to come back after getting through the LSAT this year, if they came back in 3 years, you wouldn't hear any of these complaints or concerns because everybody will be used to it at that point.
What you can say, because everybody will be taking the GRE.
I hope not. As I said before, I love the LSAT. I think it's a fantastic test. It's so well made. Some of the stuff they do is really cool from a logic standpoint. I'm a big admirer of the test construction aspects. It's just that this is transitional, and when you have that kind of scenario, there's going to be concerns and complaints, and there's going to be some bumpy moments, just like what we had yesterday. Let's hope they learn from it, go forward, and get better.
Yeah. I hate the phrase "I told you so," and I'm not directing it at you this time. But we told them in several episodes of earlier podcasts, like, guys, LSAC, listen to us, prepare for issues, have contingencies, know that there's going to be problems that even you don't foresee. Send paper to places where the tablets might not work, for instance.
This was the easiest warning we've ever given because it was 100% clear that it was going to come to, I'm not going to say fruition, but it was going to occur.
Well, let me poll you on that, and then we'll move on to the test itself, because I'm interested to talk about it. In your estimation, or kind of your expectations of what yesterday and the rest of this was going to look like, would you say it was about on par with what you thought was going to happen? Better? In other words, fewer issues, fewer calamities, or worse?
This was exactly what I expected. And I mean, not exactly. I wasn't like Calgary's going to have a double fire alarm.
Man, why didn't you should have called Florida man and told him to stay home.
I figured there was going to be some centers where there were problems with the tablets working at all. I knew there was going to be a bunch of freezing and stylus issues. The check-in issue, maybe that was the one I didn't anticipate being so widespread.
Yeah.
But by and large, I felt like the rate of issues was reasonably predictable. We knew, we kept warning them about this before, and there's going to be problems. This is new software. This is new hardware. It's unavoidable. The more we learned about it, the more it was like, oh boy, that's got all the potential for a problem.
Yeah, I'm trying not to bias myself based off of the tunnel vision that I get with this sometimes, the echo chamber, whatever you want to call it, because, look, who are we really hearing from? A fairly small proportion or percentage of students, but they all had problems. Nobody hops on there for the most part online on our forum or emails me and is like, just wanted to let you know nothing bad happened. Like that. I love those emails.
I did have a couple of those.
Send me those. Yeah, I got a couple. But for the most part, when people reach out or make noise, it's because they have something to get loud about.
Yeah. This is a small percentage of people, but they are loud about it. Yeah. But if 3 people go online and complain about what happened in Florida, there were more than 3 people in the room. There's a bunch of people who didn't go online or that I didn't encounter online. So, again, it is true.
Extrapolate this out in some instances. That student of mine that I read a portion of how his tablet just went demonic, Casper the Friendly Answer-Changing Ghost, he said he was the only one in the room that had a tablet issue the whole time.
Yeah.
Now, their check-in took 2.5 hours.
But it's interesting to see that kind of thing occur, where you're looking at it and everyone else had no problem. And that's the problem, is the isolation of this feels really randomized, and because it is, but it doesn't change how you're going to feel as a student if it occurs to you. If you have that disaster, it hurts. Let's move on. Let's talk about this test itself, because I feel like I'm not going to say we've beaten that topic to death, but I think we've beaten it, buried it, and then had 6 months to recover from it.
There you go. I don't feel recovered for whatever that's worth.
It's only 24 hours later.
Beaten and buried, I'll give you those.
So one of the things that we talked about beforehand was our expectation that this was going to be a really middle-of-the-road test. That we didn't expect a huge amount of difficulty in logic games or anything weird in games or anything that was just like soul-crushing in reading comprehension. And the good news was that, I think, was borne out. This test...
It'd be hard to argue that this test really betrayed any of those things.
No. I mean, we'll go through each of the sections momentarily, but as an overall level of difficulty, this was medium at worst, probably maybe perhaps on the easier side, if anything.
Interesting.
Which we'll talk about from a scaling standpoint that was there. Yeah. There was nothing abnormal. There was no circular game that popped up or like, oh, it's a mapping game we haven't seen for 15 years. Right. It was really the wheelhouse. If you listen to our Crystal Ball seminar, everything that we said about the composition of what they were going to do in, say, like logic games and reading comprehension, and even the vast majority of LR, that's pretty much what they did.
Yeah. They stuck really closely to that. Now, of course, I want to put the disclaimer out here. I know you know it. It's not for you. We can only talk about this so deeply.
Yeah.
We can't tell you specifically what the games were, because there's people who still haven't taken this. There's probably people sitting taking it right now. Hell, there's probably people sitting waiting to check in still right now.
Waiting for their tablet to sync.
That's right. But if you did listen to that Crystal Ball webinar, it seems that we got the content right.
The gist of it was on the money. Now, we did talk about the fact that we felt that there were a set of tests that they could choose from. Mm-hmm. And I was really hoping they would choose one of those tests. They didn't do that. They chose from that era, though.
Yeah, and this has been one of the most interesting things that I've learned about this test through what I think is just a fluky oversight. Every LSAT that you take, and apparently on the tablet as well, has a copyright disclaimer at the front. This is property of law services, blah, 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 LSAT. Not to be distributed. You guys know how copyright stuff works, but they put a date on there. Now, if you go and look at the June test that was just released, is it out in public yet? I need to look at that. If you look at the June test that just happened last month, and you look at the front inside cover of it, you will see the copyright on it is as to be expected 2019. And a number of the tests that people took yesterday, I don't know why they were looking at this, had copyright 2019. But a lot of them didn't. A lot of the copyrights on the tests that people took yesterday were 2016. And again, I don't know why people are reading that text, but this was confirmed by at least 8 to 10 people. They're like, oh yeah, I totally saw 2016. And somebody else would be like, yeah, me too. I was weird, right? Saw it. A lot of that happened on the tablet tests. If you listen to this now, there's no real value to gain from checking it if you take the test later in the week, so I don't feel like I'm giving anything away.
You're not.
I make this point to say we can actually tell based on that when this test was written, when this was built. They didn't update the copyrights to the present year because they left it at the year of its construction.
Yeah, so right in that 2016 era.
So when we talked about those two February tests from February 2016 and February 2017 as potential reuse candidates, we were also talking about the idea of, so it's a good idea, guys, to go back and study tests within this range. Be familiar with these tests and the recent stuff, too. And sure enough, you got basically a 2016 test year.
That's exactly right. And given the fact that the test itself felt very normal, I don't think that, anybody, it made a huge difference really when that test was from at that point. Once the test felt pretty reasonable, it was a matter of just go out and do as well as you possibly can. Don't freak out. Don't lose it. You always have this beautiful silver lining safety net that's coming down on August 28th.
Yeah. So, like I say, I think that's more just an interesting fact, and it validates our suspicions to a degree. I wish they had used one of the tests we had talked about, but they did actually pick from that same era, same exact thing.
You could have entered the pantheon of LSAT gods.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Although last July's call, I think,
actually,
has already,
last July's might be more impressive because we had to go back 4 years for that test.
That's true. Well,
anyway,
maybe one day we can enter that pantheon.
As we orbit it, but not quite. But
always on the outside.
Right. Given that it was a fairly normal, I'll call it predictable test, I don't think that I got the impression it was as easy as you did.
Maybe so.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards a little bit tougher, and you're leaning maybe a little bit more medium light.
Yeah, this definitely can be the case that where you have differing opinions. They're not differing by that much.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the scale prediction. I made it yesterday, and I said, preliminarily, I'm going to say a -12 for a 170, meaning that on this test you could miss 12 questions, and that would be enough to give you a 170.
Right.
And as far as scales go, that's pretty much in the middle. Now, I also pointed out that if I had to change that, if somebody was like, hey, you missed it, it's bingo and it's not -12, I would have gone to -11. Games really, you can't say these games were super hard or even really on the hard side. We'll come through and we'll talk a little bit about this momentarily, but there was nothing in this test where I was like, ooh, that's going to knock the scale back.
Yeah, I kind of went the other direction with it. I like -12, I'll live there, but I think if I had to pick a different number, I might have gone the other way. I might have gone to -13. And there's factors beyond just the content of the test that are influencing me a little bit, and they may be non-factors, frankly.
True.
But I'll point one of them out at least. Obviously the unfamiliarity for half the people with the actual tablet. that may have some role in this.
Hurts.
Yeah, it can't help to take a test type you've never had the chance to do before, really. And to have a machine that you can't rely on. To me, I know for a fact, there's no speculation in this, this is simply true, that the audience who signed up to take this test is not of the same polished or final stage caliber that most LSATs, that most LSATs tend to attract. A lot of people, put another way, took this test as a trial run. They're like, I'm not ready, I know I'm going to take it again, but this one's free and I'll see my score, and if I'm lucky, I'll get to play with a tablet. I mean... if it works, if I get the tablet and it turns on, I'll get to play with the tablet. So I know a lot of people entered it with this very casual mindset. They're like, no, I'm not going to hit my number. I'm just taking it because why not?
Well, because you can see your score. Maybe I'll get lucky.
We've talked about this all year. It's like, kind of crazy not to give July a shot. Plus, it's also the last of the tests that doesn't count towards your repeat limit that's been instituted.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason, give it a roll. Who cares? So, I say all of that to make the point that I have a suspicion that could impact scores for the worse. In other words, the overall averages or score performance that you see here may drop a little bit based simply on the fact that people aren't as ready, as prepared as they typically would be. What does that mean? It means that LSAC may need to soften the scale slightly to account for these people who have almost artificially anchored the score lower.
It's interesting because I have a slightly different take on that. Because I got asked a lot about, well, don't you think the fact that the test pool being less prepared is going to turn into a looser scale? My personal opinion is that it won't have an effect. That even if this curves out, and I'll use that word very loosely, curves out as the scores are generally lower, I think they have tested these questions multiple times now in pre-test environments. They've clearly been pointing to this for a while. And so they kind of know where scores should be. They understand some of these factors that we're talking about, that people rushed to take this test. It was, if I recall correctly, twice as many test takers as they expected.
I didn't know it was a factor of 2. I knew it was more.
I believe that's the number that I had heard or read on their site or something like that.
So from 15,000 to almost 30,000.
Yeah, I think they expected 10 to 12 and ended up with somewhere, I think the final was 28,000. Yeah. And then they lost a bunch because of people saying, nah, forget it.
Because the tablets didn't work.
Yeah, and so I feel, well, they feared the tablets wouldn't work, so they just canceled out the night before. But I think they'll use that original baseline information they have and not so much an adjusted scale for this particular group. One of the things they have a long history of doing is saying, look, we pre-tested this, we know where you should score, and if you don't, we're not going to just crazily torture the scale to fit what it should be. We'll let some data gaps actually occur. And so I think that's probably what will happen here. I think it'll be the same scale as it would have been in general. Now, disclaimer.
We know they do adjust. Put your disclaimer, and then we'll talk about how the scale operates, because that's a question.
Let's not, because I feel like we've talked about the scaling plenty, and it's all over our website. We've written long explanations
Fair
of
enough.
this.
I'm in no hurry to talk about it more. I just keep getting asked.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty about this. First off, the adjustments to the scale, we know they do that.
After the fact. That's why it takes weeks to get your score back, or at least one.
Small adjustments, though. They're not like, okay, let's move it 3 points. In this case, they're like, we need to fit, a few less people into the 170s, so we're going to get rid of 175 or something.
Right.
But that aside, the disclaimer I was going to make is this, is that you're now going through a 6-week period where we can't see the data. Some things have happened with this test that are certainly unusual. Perhaps in hindsight, you can say, well, I can see why they did that, but they are not normal, which, of course, we'll talk about. But the truth of the matter is nobody can see inside what they're doing. It's a black box. They're not talking, nor should they be. And so it's speculative. And we realize that that's what's occurring. I think everybody who's listening realizes that. I think we're fairly well informed on this, but they can't just all of a sudden break the scaling and say, well, we're going to completely redo this for this particular LSAT because we had a few more people than normal who weren't prepared to take it, but were induced to do so by our incentives.
Yeah, we thought it'd be -12, but, oh God, it's -17. That would be the best day ever.
I was just going to say, now that would be fantastic. We would love to be
Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to
wrong.
talk them out of it.
Yeah.
It just won't happen.
Don't do that. If LSAC's listening and they're like, this is a minus 18 scale for 170, please bring that on. That would be absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Not going to happen, but it would be great.
And we'll never know. This is another non-disclosed test issue that we can speculate on the scale, but really what we're talking more about here is just our impression of difficulty, because the number itself is forever a mystery.
Yeah, maybe years and years down the road,
they might release it one day.
We'll find out about it, and maybe I'll be like, in a decade, we were right, but right now there's no way for us to know, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. Although it would be great if they did, because I would love to get a look inside what they're thinking here. Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the actual test itself.
Sorry, I can't help thinking about you in a decade still doing this podcast. And I'm like, oh, man.
If you're lucky.
If I'm lucky, yeah. I'll be dead and gone, so you don't have to worry about me.
You know, I said that when I was your age, too. And look what happened.
Yeah, look at you still going. Let's talk about games, because this was... Not only was, as you said before, a pretty easy section of logic games, but one of the more unusual elements on this test, and there were quite a few, was that everybody had the same set of games. I don't want to get too deep into the experimental stuff yet.
Yeah,
But I do think we can say with total confidence what the games were, because everybody had a single set from what we've seen.
Well, obviously the experimental section is the big question. I don't know how many hundreds of times I've been asked about it already, and we are getting there. Save the best for last, as they say. Everybody had the same game section. It does not appear that there were any experimental game sections, so take that and store it for a moment, because I don't ever recall that happening. So those 4 games... They were really reasonable. I mean, the first game was about the order of rooms being renovated in a house. It was a great start to this test. You had a game about labor and management and arbitrators that, from what I've heard about it, required some work, but it was certainly doable. You had a technicians to patients game that I've heard some comments about, but nobody was like, I couldn't do it, and I left the test center. And then you had a game about robot exhibits on a Tuesday and Wednesday. And you can kind of figure out a little bit of what type of games these were just by the names of the title. But as we said beforehand, there's going to be linear games. There's going to be grouping. Prepare for those. Yeah. That's exactly what we got, was a bunch of that. And we didn't get anything that was like insanely crazy or some kind of strange rule that really like blew everybody away. I had one student tell me that she said, I am petrified of logic games, and I had them, and I felt really good about it. Now, on the one hand, great for her, because that's a fantastic, feeling to have when that was the section that you really feared. On the other hand, if somebody who is, admittedly not the best at logic games is telling you that that was a great section, it means that it was not hard. It means that at worst, it was reasonable or medium difficulty, and most likely on the easier side. And I would classify this section as definitely on the easier side overall, from what I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we kind of heard back in June when that test was first being discussed, as people were like, yeah, I didn't think they were too bad. The thing that I always kind of look for, especially on a test like this, where I've just speculated that the people taking it might not be as far along in their prep journeys as they will eventually be, is, God, I've never seen anything like that. Or, what in the world was that third game? I didn't hear a bit of that about this.
If you compare that to that June test, you remember everybody was like, the first 2 games were really easy.
Yeah.
And indeed they were. And then the last 2 games were harder. But they built up extra time.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that there's even a game as hard as the 4th game from the June 2019 LSAT on this test. It certainly, maybe there was, but nobody was worried about it. They were focused elsewhere. So you had that. I just don't feel like the games was the notable part of the difficulty here. Probably what came out most frequently in terms of difficulty was reading comprehension.
Yeah.
So
there are whole talking threads on various places online where it's like, hardest reading comp in history.
No.
Worst reading comp I've ever seen.
That's always a natural feeling.
Of course.
I mean, look, you just sat down.
Well, I don't know if it's a natural feeling. You don't always hear that, but
you hear it a lot.
Yeah, it does happen a lot.
I think, after a 4-hour test, it's grueling, it's mentally challenging. It's really natural to walk out and think, that was super hard. And then some people really take it to the nth degree where they're like, no, it wasn't just super hard, Dave. It was the hardest ever.
World-ending difficulty. What language is this even written in? Kind of stuff. Really?
I've had people tell me after the test, that game was so hard you could not do it. And I'm like, ooh, I want to see this game. And then you get it, and it's like, this is a pattern game. You need to know the pattern. Which is not a knock on them. It's really just more of a testament to the fact that this is a challenging mental exercise. And when you add fatigue on top of it, stuff that you normally would be like, if I did that in 8:45 and that was the only thing I did in the last hour, you'd be fine with it. But you put it in the middle of this test, and it's like, well, that was really tough.
Yeah.
And you're not wrong.
I do think reading comp was probably of above average difficulty, if we're going to call it something.
I would say so, yes.
It seemed the focus on this as difficult was greater than normal. I'm a little curious, and maybe I should have done a better job of this. I'm a little curious as to how much the tablet experience, which we know is half the people, impacted that. We talked already, Dave, about reading comp really probably being the hardest adjustment to make from paper to tablet.
Yeah.
I wonder how much just the fact that a lot of the complainers probably did have a digital test, if that's part of where the difficulty came from, the format as opposed to the actual words.
I think, since it's so soon after the test, it's really hard for us to make, to draw some insights that feel universal. I think in a week or two, we'll have a better sense of that as we talk to more people about, like, how did that actually go on the tablet? How did reading comprehension feel? Was it harder because of, the tablet? And I think we'll hear a lot of comments to that effect, that it does make it harder. I know we feel that way. But
definitely.
It seems like two of the passages were a little bit easier and the two of them were a little bit harder. And probably the hardest one was this passage about history and the general laws. I heard the most complaints about that. I believe that was the comparative passage, if I recall correctly.
It was.
But you had other passages about nutrition and cancer. You had one about disclosure requirements. And then you had a passage that some people remembered from before, and that was about the Louvre and that little glass pyramid in front of it that was designed by I.M. Pei. World-famous architect who I think just passed away recently.
He died, I think, in the last year or two. It might have been even within the last several months. I remember getting a notification on my phone.
Yeah, I didn't know you were such an architecture fan.
Oh, I just have Apple News.
Okay.
So I'll get one when, like, Bette Midler dies.
Things I get random. Want to know.
Yeah.
Well, that glass pyramid.
I am a big Bette Midler fan, though, so let's just put that out and let's make that clear.
Little sidebar: that glass pyramid at the Louvre is genius. What really an incredible design move that was! Iconic worldwide at this point. But that passage was actually used as an experimental passage back in September of 2017.
Right.
And so you can see, we can look back on this test, and that's not the only part where we can see where these games or passages were used before. We can see that they were testing part of this over time. But that whole section was probably the hardest of all of the sections on the whole. And I would agree with you, harder than average. But your games weren't that tough, and there is offset. They're trying to make the test have a certain level of difficulty. And if you've got a section that's easier, there's going to be a section that's harder. That's not something like, ooh, the scale's going to be really loose because of that. It wasn't that tough. The passages, I think, from what I know of them, were challenging for sure, but not, this is impossible.
Yeah, and back to that middle-of-the-road prediction that we made, these passage types, the topics, all of it was just right in line with what we said. Look, you're going to see some science, you're going to see some law, you're going to see some humanities. Here we are.
Yeah, same thing with the games. Predicted the linearity, the grouping, not that difficult to predict, to be honest with you, but it was right down the pipeline.
Yeah, not that difficult to predict if you're just playing the odds.
Yeah.
But, of course, there are times when those predictions fail, a pattern game or some crazy passage.
I would have been really surprised to see something like that, and I was really pleased not to.
Yeah, that's why we said we didn't think it would happen, and look at us go. It didn't.
I'll take credit there.
Yeah, we can take credit for some LR. We can take credit for kind of the structure of LR in terms of like question distribution, frequency of types, ideas and language. These are all things that again, middle of the road, content exactly as expected.
Now, let me set you up with one additional piece of information.
Yeah, there was a mentioned coming and you knew it.
That logic games, everybody had those 4 logic games, and we didn't know of any exceptions to that. Well, guess what? Those 4 RC passages that I just talked about, we don't know of any exceptions to that was the same scored section for everybody, and there were no other experimentals that had RC. Now that is wildly unusual, and it means something kind of incredibly crazy, that every single person that we're aware of, which is at this point a pretty high count,
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people,
easily over 1,000, they have all had logical reasoning as their experimental. And it wasn't just like, okay, really crystal clear as to which one was experimental, which we're about to dive into.
That's where we'll get.
But think about that for a moment. That kind of thing hasn't happened in years and years and years.
Has it happened ever? Because I'm not familiar with it.
I was thinking about these tests from the 90s where there were some really set in, but I still always, they would set, back in the old days, everybody had the experimental in the same spot. And I'm trying to remember if at that point in time there was ever a test where it's like, well, everybody had logic games or everybody had logical reasoning. I can't recall that being the case.
Yeah.
But this test is also 71 years old, and I don't know every instance of what they've done. So my view has been like, I don't recall it ever happening like this.
Yeah. Well, you were just a boy for the first decade of it. There's no reason you would know.
You and your caustic wit.
You know me. But
yes, I do.
I have never seen a test that only had a single experimental type for everyone. Put another way, everyone who took the test yesterday and presumably through this week had 3 sections of logical reasoning, 1 section of logic games, 1 section reading comp. Everybody. Not in that order, but that composition.
Yeah, so let's dive into what's going on with the experimental section here. And I will preface this by saying it's not really clear.
Yeah.
So we've got some theories. Let's talk about, first off, what we know about the experimental section on the whole that actually affects our views and some of the analysis that we'll actually make.
What we know almost like historically, right? How
Yes.
they've always done things, the tradition of how this is used and what happens, right?
Exactly.
Okay. First things first.
Do it.
It moves around. So typically, some people will take a test and maybe they have an experimental section in 1, maybe they get 2 reading comps, reading comp 1, reading comp section 4. Their first reading comp doesn't count. The person sitting next to them has an experimental section in section 3, and it's their second LR or something. So not everyone has the exact same section of experimental. Even people who have the exact same section order. So take what we saw yesterday. Logical reasoning, logic games, logical reasoning, reading comp, logical reasoning. Just making that up.
So LR in 1, 3, and 5.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm trying to spread them out to make it really clear where they live.
Sure.
So one of those is going to be experimental. LR 1, 3, or 5. Somebody sitting beside you could have the same order, and their first LR is experimental. Your fifth or your final LR could be experimental. So even though, from a sectional breakdown, your tests are identical, what actually counts where is different.
Yeah, and this is an important point because we've seen people online saying, well, what you're arguing is that the experimental section, even for the people with the same sequence of LR, it might have moved around. Yeah, we know that. That's not news to anybody. You can have the exact same section order as the person, whatever, next to you, and you might have section 1 experimental, I might have section 3 experimental. They could both be LR experimentals.
Yeah.
But they're in
I might have
different
section
spot.
5 experimental. They can move it to all 3 spots, potentially.
Okay, so that's the first fact where it's like this. When you start adding this variation to it, this is where confusion starts to get in. Now, there was a lot more confusion after this test than I think maybe any test I remember.
The reason being, one reason being, we'll talk more about this, is that, and I'm actually not jumping maybe to the exact next point that you were going to say.
Okay.
There's always a way to figure out experimental sections if someone only has 2 LRs.
Mm-hmm.
But since no one did, it's virtually impossible to know from that test what's real. Put another way, if you only have 2 LRs, you know the 50 questions or whatever that counted. Someone with 3 LRs can start to match theirs to yours and eliminate or select.
Yeah.
No one has just the 50 real questions.
Then
it becomes so much murkier.
It's always the case that figuring out the LR experimental is the toughest.
For sure.
It's always been there. I mean, figuring out logic games and reading comprehension experimental is actually relatively easy. Except when there are none. It's easy because there weren't any. But when you have everybody with 3 logical reasoning sections, you have mass confusion. And we'll kind of get to that point.
Regardless of what they've done this time, if they've maybe changed some stuff behind the scenes, had that happened in June, had that happened anywhere in the past where they were sticking to business as usual, but with just one experimental type of LR, you would still have this degree of confusion, I think, or a whole lot of it.
You would have had a huge amount of confusion for sure.
You just don't have the real questions guaranteed by any one test.
Okay, so then let's move to the second point that we know about these experimentals, which is this, is that not everybody, even if they get the same section type, gets the same section. So if I had a logic games experimental and you had a logic games experimental, obviously different tests than July here, it could be that I might have 4 games that you don't have in my experimental. You might have 4 different games. They test multiple versions of each experimental type throughout the year. This is why sometimes you talk to students after the game or after the test, and there's like 12 different logic games that are being discussed.
Yeah, 12 different passage topics.
Yeah, only 4 of them are real, and the other 8 were experimental. Sometimes it's more than that.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? They do that with logical reasoning as well. And so when you already have the confusion of no reference point, and then you add in the fact that there is multiple versions of that same section, and this is just if things stayed exactly the same from the past. So
right, yeah, we're just speaking about how things have always been.
It's always been the case. I don't want anyone to get militant on it just yet. You're already looking at really hundreds of questions potentially.
Potentially, yeah. Even if they just had 2 versions of the experimental and logical reasoning, you're over 100 questions.
Exactly, and I think they used more than that in this instance.
That's a virtual certainty, which, again, we'll talk a little more about.
All right, so let's move to the...
What else do they do?
Third point, and this is something that we've really noticed a lot more in recent years.
Yeah.
And that is the reuse of topics within the same test in order to, I think, create confusion.
Yeah, this is clearly intentional.
Yeah, you can argue what the intent is. First off, one of the things I always say is if you have somebody making questions for you and they're an expert in a certain area, guess what they want to do? They want to make a lot of questions in that same
they want to
area.
write passages about bumblebee dances and stuff.
Yeah, the waggle dance.
That's right.
Or, back in the old days, serotonin. I want to talk. The serotonin guy was like, I'm talking about serotonin all the time. So it showed up in RC, it showed up in logical reasoning, it was all over the place. Dinosaur experts, all these different topics that you look at, there are typically people that are out there and they're producing a bunch of questions that aren't related to it. However, we know that the post-test conversation online has been concerning for LSAC, and with good reason. This is why we are very strict about, just talk about the topics. They said that's okay.
No answers, no strategy, none of that. Yeah.
Yeah, don't talk about answer choices. Don't talk about how to diagram rules. Don't talk about any of the specifics of the test that could change somebody's experience. But one of the things we noticed several years ago was that they had started, for example, they might have a game on the scored portion of the test that is about office buildings. And then one of the experimental games is also about offices or buildings or something that's close. So post-test, you'd get these hazy discussions that people would be like, wait, I thought it was over here. That was in a different section. Kind of sowing confusion in that entire arena with that point. And it wasn't just like a one-off. I've seen this happen
over and over. Yeah.
Dozens of times now in the last several years, and it's happened in LR. I've seen it happen in RC.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'd say nowhere is it more prominent because of the opportunities than in logical reasoning.
Because there's so many. And our archives show us this, where we're like, look at that. There was a question. I think you and I were talking about vampires earlier.
Yeah.
And we weren't talking about the vampire question that was on this particular test, but we're like...
It was our Anne Rice fan club. Had a meeting.
Yeah, part of the problem is that if you have multiple versions of a particular topic, it becomes really difficult to discern what you're looking at. Because maybe the question was about how vampires featured in historical literature back in the 1800s. And then another vampire question in a different section was about vampires and how, they're part of society and a personification of evil, for example. Well, after the test, nobody's talking in that detail of a form. They're just talking about vampires.
Yeah. You guys remember that vampire question?
Yeah, I totally do. But we're not talking about the same question at this point. We're talking about 2 different ones.
That happens all the time. I should clarify, too, when you said we were talking about vampires earlier, it was around this specific example. I feel like those dudes are weird. We weren't just having a casual conversation about,
John, when do you think
Nosferatu.
they'll make another Twilight? I really missed that.
That's what it was.
For the record,
You know what
I do
vampires
not miss
aren't?
Twilight.
They're not sparkly enough. That's the problem.
I really miss Edward Cullen. No, that is false. I do not.
No, I know you don't. I miss that wolf guy, though.
Not
Whatever
him
happened
either.
to him?
I disappeared.
Yeah.
I haven't checked in on him recently because I don't know him.
Yeah.
I see Kristen Stewart every once in a while, modeling Chanel or something like that.
There you go. Anyway, that was the context in which vampires are being discussed. And frankly, look, think about how much confusion we just created by not even clarifying how we were talking about vampires.
Exactly.
Just on the topic, you can go in 10 different directions. So this is a concern. And they're doing this, like I say, I don't know purely what their intent is, but I do know it's intentional.
I feel like I know what their intent is.
Yeah,
I think that their concern over the widespread discussion of the LSAT after each test is real and is something that is tangible. They watch what people say online. They don't want them having these incredibly specific conversations. And so this is a way to confuse things and to muddy the waters in terms of what people are saying or what they're doing out there.
Yeah, it obscures it.
Yeah, and if your intention is to create a problem here, well, they've just been able to do that successfully. They gave everybody the same third section, and then they used a bunch of topics that were similar, and they used hundreds of questions. You have a recipe for uncertainty.
Yeah,
and this is precisely what we got.
Yeah, something they've really been leaning into, never more so than now. So why? Let's talk about now.
Okay.
Why did they just do LR as the only experimental? Everybody gets 3. Why not mix it up the way they always have?
Well, I think if you're trying to create a testing scenario where you are measuring the validity of a test as you move from one format to another, you want to actually decrease the variation in controlled variables. And one of the things is that throwing in games and reading comprehension and logical reasoning as 3 different types can really be detrimental to certain test takers. If I'm bad at logic games and I get that as my experimental section, it has a broad negative effect on my test performance. And the same for each of the other sections. So what could we do here? We can go ahead and say, if we use just LR, which is it's very hard to get a grasp on it because there's so many questions, and it's very much like each little event. It's not 4 big games where 1 game knocked me out, or 4 reading passages where 1 was super tough. You have this nice, consistent section. It's perfect for their data. It gives them actually a clean data look because, hey, the experimental section, that wasn't our problem here because everybody just had extra LR to deal with.
Right. So it standardizes it. It takes some of the variance between a 2-game and a 2-reading comp discrepancy out. There's consistency to this. Plus, I think LR is the fairest section to do this with anyway. It's already half your score. Add more to it. And of course, again, if you're looking for obscurantism, this will give it to you. It's going to make it by far the hardest to determine after the fact. Even as we sit here now and as students, frantically search the interwebs, it's really hard to know what was scored on this test.
It's really difficult. So let's get into some theories then, because this is not a situation where you can say with absolute authoritative certainty, this was real, that was experimental, and that's the end of the conversation. So going into
in terms of sections.
Yeah. I mean, we know logical reasoning, one of those sections was a problem. We know that's where the experimental was.
We think, yeah.
No, we know that.
You can talk individually about questions. You can say, this question was experimental, because not everybody who took the test had it. But trying to pin this down to a section at this point is really tough.
Yeah, and I will say this much. When we take a look at the LR stuff that is out there, we're going to talk about different theories and say this is some of the things that people have floated. This is some of our theories that we've looked at, and talk about what we really think happened and explain why and kind of give the basis for it. There are certain things that I look at and, for example, I've been asked many times, which one of the 3 sections, do you feel like the most confident about? I feel like the 26 question LR was real. And I feel like one of the 25 question LR sections was real. And there are questions I can point to in LR and say, like that British trade and port question. Some people had that, some people didn't. That is the classic hallmark of a question that is not scored. or the Napoleon arsenic question. On the other hand, I don't know that I've encountered a student yet who didn't have the whale/echolocation question. But I will say this, you have to remember when you think about all this, memory is a really tough thing to lock down, especially after you've gone through a very pressure-filled situation. And there was extra tension about this test that I don't think has really been clearly factored in, which is a lot of people walked in not knowing what test format they were going to get. They were already under pressure, even as they got, to the test center.
Yeah, not just a lot of people.
Everybody.
Everybody.
Yes.
We'll talk a little more about, student memory and recall and stuff. But here's what's always been true. The reason you could make these identifications of experimental questions is because the scored content, the 100 or so questions, is always the same for everyone. And so I have the same 100 questions for real as the person next to me and behind me and across the country and wherever. Yeah. So if you have a question that someone else doesn't, then that question cannot be real. If they had a question that you didn't have, that question can't count, because that would produce two different sets of scored content.
Which would actually fundamentally change what the LSAT is, to have taken it in a different direction here.
There is no longer a June test. There are June tests at that point, or a July test. There would be multiple versions of it. And that is something we've never gotten into, but it is a theory that's been tossed around. Maybe we're having a hard time pinning this LR stuff down because they used different versions of the scored LR for different people. Overlapping versions, but different.
Yeah, so this is the first theory. And we're just throwing these out as theories. We're going to talk about each one and either agree with it or disagree with it, as the case may be. So I'll let you continue. I'm sorry to jump in.
Oh, no, of course. I mean, we're going to run down a list of, and we'll probably assign some likelihoods to things as we go. We're starting with one that I think is extremely unlikely.
Agreed.
I don't think I'm going to put a 0 likelihood on any of these, and I certainly don't think I've reached a point where I can say 100%. Dave, you may go to
I'm 0
absolutes.
on this one.
Okay. I'm 1%, 2%.
What you're trying to do is cover all your bases.
Damn right.
Commit to a position, man.
I'm extremely confident, although apparently a little less so than Dave, that they did not administer multiple tests that were largely duplicates of one another, but had small variations in the scored content. These tests are 92% the same, but a few LR questions we mixed them around.
Yeah, this theory trades on the idea that everybody had the same logic games and reading comprehension, but that person A had one version of LR, person B had a different version, person C had a third version that were largely the same, but had small variations in key questions, which would explain some of the discrepancies that you see online. I will say, and everybody's happy to argue with me, although I'm not going to respond, that I just don't find this credible at all. To me, I'm like, oh, you're going to go ahead and switch the platform and all of a sudden change the LSAT, which has, been built upon this idea over 70 years that it's going to be consistent? I don't think so. I just have a really hard time buying this.
I do too. What this would mean, theoretically, to talk about a question you mentioned, that British trade and port question?
Yes.
That a lot of people had, but a lot of people didn't. Could have been real for some of them, but not the others. In other words, you had it on your test, it counted. You didn't have it on your test because you have a different test. That I cannot, for the life of me, see occurring.
If they're doing this, it's lawsuit time for some people, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean...
That's not what they promised students. Their website says it's, everybody gets the same 4 scored sections.
Yeah.
You just broke your promise, and I paid you $200 for you to break your promise. Now, again, I'm not saying anybody should sue LSAC. I think that's not worth anybody's time. But I also don't think this happened. So we're talking about a hypothetical to me that's like, sure, nope.
It's easy to indulge in extreme reaction to a non-event. But yeah, I can't get behind this. So we'll call this less than 1%. Does that make you happy?
No, 0, baby.
0 is less than 1.
I didn't say you were wrong about less than 1%. I said let's get more specific.
Okay. You just said it didn't make you happy.
Could be true versus cannot be true. And
Let's talk about something that I do know is true. The extent to which is debatable. But a second theory here, why are people having such a hard time pinning this down? I don't think that this is a comprehensive explanation, but it is a factor. It's an undeniable factor. it's really hard to remember with a high degree of precision and detail all the things that happened to you and exactly where they occurred, especially when you begin to compound it with the factors we talked about before. Multiple logical reasoning sections, multiple placements of logical reasoning sections, unintentional reuse or duplication of common subject matter and topics, and just the exhaustion of a test day that for a lot of people was even 2 hours longer than it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
You throw all of that into a bucket and stir it up, and what you get are hazy recollections, dubious recall.
What we have called the collective fever dream.
I think I called it collective dementia, but it comes to the same thing. It's not quite mass hysteria because nobody's losing their mind too much, but it's really hard to remember everything.
And I will say this much. This theory has a degree of truth to it no matter what. This is always the case. I had someone arguing with me about, they'd heard about a reading comprehension topic that was experimental, and I was like, that was LR. It's very easy for things that are not true to all of a sudden whip around the internet, and someone's like, no, I heard this, I heard that. More importantly, though, I have years of experience in talking to students immediately after the LSAT. And if I took everything that I heard at first blush as being true, I would have been out of business years and years ago. Because, again, this test is such a mind-crushing experience, and it really kind of like puts you all over the spectrum in terms of like your emotions and anxiety, that I've had students come out and be like, no, I started the test with logic games and I went to this. And of course, it turns out later on they had logic games third.
Yeah.
And this is, that's happened to me multiple times in talking to students. Or,
Hundreds.
No, that game was second. I guarantee it. I've had people yelling at me, and I'm like, all the evidence says that it was actually the first game.
I did not have a game about robot exhibits.
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did. So, and again, not to cherry pick individual oversights and things, what I hesitate to even call this a theory. I guess the theory portion of this is the idea of just how much this goes to explain the difficulty and the confusion, really uncertainty about locking down a section as experimental at this point. Is it just because, on the whole, people are having a hard time remembering with the precision that they are giving themselves credit for?
Well, you've got some people online who are very adamant about, I remember this being the case.
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to argue with them.
Right. No, I'm not going to argue with anybody, frankly.
I also think that in some of these instances, when you have multiple people talking, it's like an infection. It's like a mental, a mind infection where it's like, yeah, maybe that question was there or that was followed by this.
Yeah.
And you are subject to the influence and the social cues of the conversation around you. And all of a sudden it becomes really easy to be like, you're right. That wasn't the way that it actually was. I remember it this way.
Right.
But again, you're taking it through this prism of pressure and anxiety and honestly exhaustion.
Yeah.
And trying to figure it out, and it makes it really tough.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is like eyewitness testimony 101. And that can be done in the most casual, wide awake kind of sense, alert sense. And you still get the getaway car color wrong, and there were 4 of them, I swear, but there were 6. This just every time. So,
are you saying that LSAC's passage on RC passage on the June 2019 LSAT was actually a precursor to this, that they foreshadowed?
No, but anyone listening to this who thinks we're wrong, there's a test back in June and a passage. It'd serve you well to read. It's just, witnesses. It's unreliable at its base. How unreliable or to what extent that's going to cause problems, that's a little tougher. And again, the more people you get agreeing on a thing, the more validity it does give it. If
sure.
10 people are like, I did not have that question, I trust that more than one person being like, I don't remember that.
Yeah, single kind of witness comments, I almost immediately discount. It's got to be confirmed multiple times for me to feel like there's a degree of comfort with it could be or at least likely to be true.
So anyone listening to this with clenched fists, know that I'm with you on the sense that the more people who can confirm or deny, the more credence it does give certain suspicions or certain truths.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there has been a lot of independent confirmation of certain things.
There has been. I also want to say this for those of you who are like, no, my memory's infallible. No, it's not.
I promise it's not.
And I've had many people call me up afterwards and be like, I just saw the test. I was wrong. I'm like, it's okay. It's actually really understandable. And I've explained why multiple times. So let's go to the third theory, which I find to be the
It's
one.
my favorite,
Yes.
not because I think it's true.
No, I don't.
I
either.
just think it's the most interesting.
It's clearly the most interesting one. It's the most like kind of paranoid conspiracy theory.
Well, I don't know if I go
Maybe
that
the
far.
first one's pretty paranoid conspiracy theory.
Yeah. No, we're not quite at InfoWars yet, but this is
Sweet.
yeah, I love an Alex Jones dig.
I love that reference.
But there is, I'll say this too, right at the jump when we talk about this, there is a degree of potential evidence lending some credence to this.
Well, this is what makes for a great conspiracy theory.
Exactly.
Is like there's
you just
enough.
need enough. What does it take to melt steel beams? Well, that probably is not the conspiracy to talk about.
No, let's move back to this one.
Yeah, number 3. This would be where the test makers have really added to the confusion of the placement of an experimental section, because there wasn't an experimental section. Instead, what occurred was all of those experimental questions were interspersed in all 3 sections alongside real content, scored content. So Section 1 had some scored stuff and experimental stuff. Section 2, the same. Section 3, talking LR sections. That's a fascinating, or a very, I think, intriguing possibility.
It is, and just to kind of like further flesh that out, you've got person A that starts off Section 1 and it's LR. First 5 questions are real, and they're the same topic as everybody else, their first 5 questions. But then questions, say, 6, 7, and 8 are experimental, and they're 3 different topics than the person next to them who had the same first 5 questions and now has 3 completely different questions for 6, 7, and 8.
Yeah.
Then maybe we go back to questions 9, 10, 11, and we're back to the scored questions that everybody has is the same. And then when we get to questions 12 and 13, they're experimental and everybody's questions switch up.
Yeah.
So that's the theory we're talking about.
Yes, that's exactly
every
right.
Section.
I have 3 potential explanations for that exact situation.
Okay.
That section's experimental for those people, and the test makers just swapped in question mixes because they could. It didn't matter.
Okay.
People misremembered it. They thought question 6 was actually from Section 1, but it wasn't. It was a later thing, and so they had grouped the questions in their mind differently than they actually had occurred. That's what we just talked about.
Yep.
Or this theory, that it was a mix. Yeah, the ones that everybody had are real. The ones that were different in that section are experimental. It has to be one of those 3 things as I see it.
Fair enough.
We've only touched on 2 of those 3. We're touching on the second now.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I find this theory to be interesting to examine, but ultimately I can't buy it at all. And I've heard some people who I actually have a fair degree of belief in say it had to be that way. And I'm like, I'm just not living in that world with LSAC. First off, because try to figure this out from a global standpoint. All right, so this is be the only time they do it. When they get to a release test, they can't release it that way, so now they're going to go back to what they had to do. You can't really do this with logic games and reading comprehension because there's only one of those sections.
Let's examine both of those.
Okay.
The release thing is something I've mentioned online as well. And I guess I should throw out there, too. We hear a lot of this talk, not as much. On our forum, we obviously get contacted directly by students. Well, pretty much to the minute, on the minute, every day. But a lot of this is coming from Reddit, which is a really valuable community for this sort of stuff and gets a lot of great traction and conversation. And in particular, this is where I was seeing a lot of this discussion happening. I was participating, as were you, in a lot of this discussion with people. Yeah. And I presented both of those things that you just raised as huge issues with trying to do a mixed section test, an interspersed experimental test. The first one that I presented, or can talk about now, and you just mentioned, is how do you release a test when the sections aren't full sections? What would you do, for instance, with this set of logical reasoning, 3 sets of logical reasoning, if you were going to release it, like they're going to have to do in September and in November? What do you pull the 16 that were real from Section 1, and then you take 8 that are real from Section 3, and you mash those together, and that's your new first logical reasoning? That's not the same test anymore. It's not even close.
And there's so much inherent unfairness in this whole process anyway with the experimental sections you get at questions, say, 7 and 8.
Yeah.
Oh, mine were easy, so I crushed them and moved on. Oh, yours were hard? Sorry.
Yeah, and that's the second issue that I raise, is the fairness. Think, though, back to that released idea of tests about really the most glaring issue, which is, what if they tried to do this with reading comp or with logic games? So my first game section only had one real game. It was game 3. So when I released the test with the 4 real games, it goes game 3, then game 1, then game 3, then game 4 from this other section. You really going to do that? Because that's not at all the same test.
Mm-mm.
You can swap them around again so that the second game 1 that was real is the new first game. God, man.
Well, and there are people out there saying, well, they can do it. They can do what they want.
Yeah.
Yes, I acknowledge that. They are the supreme rulers of the LSAT landscape, and they can do whatever the heck they want. But they also have to adhere to test validity and integrity standards. And to do what we're talking about, and what a lot of people have suggested is for sure happening, destroys so much of that I'm like, they're the guys who tout, we're the gold standard and have been for 70 years. And everybody knows I can't stand that phrase, because I'm like, it's not 1880 anymore, and we don't need to talk about the gold standard. But by the same token, it's an indication that their belief is validity and integrity, and the respect, really, that they have garnered because they are such a good test overall, that those things are important.
Yeah.
And to do this would destroy that. And, it could be that maybe down the road we're like, look at that, they actually did it. And I will stand up and be like, well, I was wrong and they're insane. I don't think I'm wrong, and I hope they're not insane.
There's a second larger issue that you mentioned a word of a second ago, and that's the idea of fairness. Fairness.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if they actually, if this did occur here in July, if they actually did this? The only reasons I can think that they would be doing it would be experimentally. Let's see what happens, let's see what we get back, how it goes, and if we like it, we can stick to it moving forward. It would make post-test discussions a whole lot tougher, as we can see.
So, I love that.
Yeah. So, if we'll talk more about that, but if they're going to experiment here, you have to think that they're at least considering this, if they've done it, as a long-term strategy. And now imagine what happens as they start to do this on future tests, especially with other sections. It's unfair in logical reasoning, but let me just take you to the most extremes, I think, example. What happens when you do this with 2 sets of logic games, but your real games are scattered across those 2 sets, intermixed with experimental? Is that really the right way to do this? Remember, experimental questions, for anybody listening, are experimental for a reason. There's a reason they don't count yet. They haven't been vetted. They're being vetted as experimentals. That's why they're there.
They might have problems.
And often do. There's whole lots of experimental content that never finds its way onto a real LSAT for whatever reason. It's too easy. It's too hard. It's badly constructed. It needs to be remade.
Biased.
Yeah, it's biased. And so you get your first section of games. The first game is real. Hooray. But you don't know. The second game is experimental. And unfortunately, it's a bad experimental. It's one they'd never use again, but they don't know that yet. It takes you 13 minutes. Because you're just struggling. You don't know if it counts or not. And because of that, you can't get to game 4, which was also real. What you've just done has been penalized by something that should have never made its way onto the test in the first place, in a way that can directly or neighborly impact scored content. I used the phrase on Reddit that experimental content hasn't earned the right to influence what's scored.
Okay.
And if they intermix this, that's precisely the scenario they've created.
And I'm going to add one other point, and then
Please.
I want to play devil's advocate with you for a second.
I know, me too.
So here's the thing, is that when you look at test changes like this, LSAC has a history of saying that if the test is going to change, they're going to let you know. Like, they told us that it was going to digital, and they were really clear about some of the changes. It took a while.
Yeah,
they
comparative
did
reading was announced almost a year in advance.
And that was exactly the example that I was going to give, is that they said, we're going to do comparative passages, and here are some examples of that. Mm-hmm. The one time I can think of where they made a change that they didn't pre-announce was when Logic Games went from 1 page to 2 pages. But this was a beneficial change to test takers that really had no impact whatsoever on the test construction or the impact of the questions or the way Logic Games worked. It actually helped people out. A surprise, certainly, but really for many people, a highly welcome surprise.
Yeah, a break with like the historical behavior. I can think of a couple more. Interestingly enough, all related to the experimental section.
Okay.
it used to be that everyone got the exact same experimental section placement. It was always in the first 3.
Mm-hmm.
Then they kept it in the first 3, but put it in different positions. Some people got it first, others got it third. Then, without an announcement, they started to put it into section 4. With, again, multiple placements for people.
Yep.
So, there have been slow and steady, silent changes to how it is that they actually build tests around the experimental or containing an experimental. That has happened.
I agree with you. And they did not tell people beforehand, oh, the experimental is going to do this. I also don't think, that they really could. And that's the one defense here, on the devil's advocate side where it's like, well, they couldn't tell you about this.
Yeah. I mean, truly that.
Could.
That's one defense on the devil. Just as a quick aside, that was harmful for a lot of students. Now granted it was his own fault. I had a buddy cancel a score because he was still under the impression the experimental had to be in the first 3, which meant his section 4 counted, and he bombed section 4.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out that was the test where they had started to put it in section 4, and they had for him.
All right, so let me play devil's advocate here. The idea of intermingling or commingling real content and experimental/research content is not unknown in test preparation or really in standardized testing. The GMAT does this, where you'll be going through it and then a question will come up and you won't realize it, but it's unscored and it is an experimental/research question that they're throwing at you.
Yeah. There's a handful in every GMAT section that do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is something that's been going on for years. And so mixing real and experimental information or questions, that's not unusual. It happens out there in the world.
It's not unprecedented.
It's not unprecedented. It's not the norm in terms of what happens, but you could point to the GMAT and be like, they did it. And so from a devil's advocate standpoint, those people should be like, the GMAT did it. It's kind of like with South Park. Simpsons did it.
Simpsons did it.
Same thing here. GMAT did it. And the thing I will say, though, is the GMAT is upfront about it. They tell you you're going to encounter that. So here, LSAC would be making a big break from, I think, fairness constraints to all of a sudden be like, yeah, we knew we were going to tablets, so we just decided to flip the entire table over and start all over again.
Yeah. I'll go one further. Right now, on their website, if you go to their discussion of this digital transition, it says in very clear terms, I'm going to read it to you. The LSAT consists of 5 35-minute sections and multiple choice questions. 4 of the 5 sections contribute to your score. And then it tells you what the 4 are. The unscored section, usually referred to as the variable section. I've never heard anybody call it that.
Except them.
Yeah. That's the experimental. The unscored section, singular, is used to pretest new questions or evaluate new test forms. The placement of this section, singular, varies, and you won't know which section, singular, is unscored until you get your score report, which is also not entirely true. But, I mean, Dave, is there any lingering ambiguity in those 2 paragraphs?
It's categorical.
Yeah. And that is, again, current right up on their website right now.
Yeah, so if you're thinking, no, I'm convinced that they did this, look, I'm not gonna be able to talk you out of it. Do I think it's unlikely? I really do, for some of the reasons that we've talked about. And we're not done yet. Obviously, There's a 4th theory. It's taking us a while to get there. It's really weird because, you think, sometimes I listen to the conversations we have and I'm like, we've gotten really passionate and deep into this extremely fine line point. I'm like, both people listening right now, I want you to know that I appreciate it.
Yeah. Or
it's the 2 of us.
You forgot to shut your computer. Could just be that. But passion is a good word for this, man, because it's been, not quite incandescent, but it's been inflamed over on Reddit and various things. I've gotten some pretty fiery comments to me about, like, this has to be what occurred. All right.
No, it does not have to be what occurred.
No.
It's a possible explanation. I discount it because I feel like this would destroy the integrity and fairness of what they're doing. And make them liars at the same time based upon what you just read off their website. Yeah. But I understand the theory when you're comparing questions like this. It's just that it becomes really difficult to do this in the context that we're talking about with the section moving around, different questions, and so forth. So let's take the final theory then. Are you ready to move on to the 4th and final one?
Except I'm going to get a number from you. You were 0% about multiple tests at the same time. What's
Yes.
your percentage for the mixed real experimental stuff? I know it's going to be higher. I know it's not still 0. I think.
Okay, I will say this. What's my percentage on this? 1%.
Oh my God.
Now, some people are saying, you gave it a chance, man. You're saying there's a chance. This is why I'm saying there's a chance. Because, man, I don't trust LSAC at all.
Yeah.
They're they do try to be unpredictable. I could see them sitting there in their Newtown, Pennsylvania offices saying, haha, look at this new thing we did. Do I think it would be radically and completely unfair? Oh, yeah. I think it would be a ridiculous thing not to have announced beforehand. It would be shocking. I would be furious. And I would say so directly to them.
Yeah.
But I always think in the back of my mind that they're like a cobra. You have to keep your eye on them. And sometimes, even if you've worked with that cobra before, they might get you. And so 1% from me. What you?
I'm gonna take what you just said about LSAC, and it's not even capriciousness sometimes. I think sometimes it's just this like blissful, mindless stumblings. And say that I think they looked at this test potentially as an opportunity to just do anything they wanted.
True.
In much the same analog way that a lot of students looked at it and they're like, no consequences. I think they feel like such generous, good guys here, and validated by the 28,000 people who signed up, that they're like, let's play around with it. They didn't tell people they were about to be lab rats. While those lab rats died.
You knew that they were going to be lab rats.
Lab rats to an extent. We're going to test this on you. In the meantime, somebody sneaks up and jabs in another needle.
Or in really what you would have, if this scenario is true, it's like, hi, we want to test this medication that's largely sugar, but it has a little bit of positivity. While your back's turned, here's a huge dose of nuclear radiation, more than Chernobyl. You stared into the nuclear reactor.
That's right. Did you watch that series, by the way?
Yes, and it is super fantastic.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, yeah, I think they may have a certain degree of like cavalierness to this, almost like a degree of liberty that they have adopted. This one time to be like, guys, if we're ever going to try this, now's our chance.
All right,
so my percentage guess to this?
5% is what you're going to say.
I'm going to say like 10 to 15.
Wow, that's high.
I've seen some really compelling evidence that this could have occurred, and my mistrust of LSAC compounded or combined with what I think for them is a get-out-of-jail-free card that they see this as.
I'm still getting messages from people who are like, no, I'm certain about it. And they're being very specific about, I know I had that topic question followed by that topic question, and I remember because this happened then. Mm-hmm. So, I grant you that. There is compelling evidence to this. I feel as if this destroys the integrity of the test wholly and completely, and because of that reason, it cannot be the case that this occurred.
Yeah, I wish I had your faith.
Maybe I'm just dumb.
I've lost my religion.
Or overconfident? I don't know. One of those things.
I don't know.
Let's go to the last theory.
The reason I'm not higher on number 3 for all of that is there is at least a competing theory that I think is more reasonable, has less working against it.
Then let's go to the final theory.
And this is our 4th possible thing here, some of which is combining with things like number 2.
Yeah, it sprinkles in elements of people forgetting things or being led down the wrong path. But this theory is built around the basic idea of how testing has always been, that the 2 scored logical reasonings were, in fact, set. They were, 1 through 26, as I will say in a minute, and 1 through 25, and they were scored out. Now, they weren't in the same spot. Some people might have had it first. Some people might have had that section third. It might have moved around. And that the remaining section, which is the viable experimental, which was all over the test, and I think maybe this is the first time we might see that they have used Section 5 as an experimental.
I think that's the case, too.
Yeah, there's a lot of compelling evidence that Section 5, finally, after all this time, we knew it was going to happen. But it looks like it was used as an experimental. They put it all over the test, and then they also used hundreds of questions, rotated those through the various experimentals, and also put in a lot of questions that had similar topical elements as to other real scored sections.
Yeah, put another way, they had a big question bank that they were pulling from, and they started to sprinkle those questions into individualized experimental sections, but not always the same way. So you got partial duplication or partial overlap from people's experimentals, And somebody would say, well, I had this on my test. I didn't have that on mine. Normally that makes it experimental, but now it could have been, in other words, there's a way that could have occurred where it was experimental both times, or I had that question too.
Yeah.
Still could have been experimental. So that, to me, is, I think, what's occurred here.
I think so as well. And I think they've also intentionally masked some of these issues. Like, I think the construction here was built in a way where it's like, we're going to make this intentionally difficult to determine afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to plunge everybody into a huge degree of uncertainty. And I've said this before, which is that when you have people talking after the test online, it is such a free-for-all that ideas get thrown out, picked up and run with, and then discarded sometimes, that really never should have even been picked up in the first place. And it's very difficult to control. If I could get everybody in a room, I could figure this out. But I'd have to ask questions that are too specific and they don't want us to ask, and I'm not going to do that. But I feel as if it's that classic thing. Yeah, we both had questions about a vampire, so yeah, we're on the same page. No, you had one vampire question, you had a different vampire question. I had a question about seals. No, you had this question about seals, and you had that question about seals. And by the way, there's a third person over there who had a different question about seals.
Yeah, except that his were seals like valves. These are the kinds of confusions that occur.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mine's a sea animal, mine's a sea animal. Oh, mine's an actual closure around this pipe fitting.
Mm-hmm.
These things, it's crazy to think about, but these things actually happen.
Well, even on Reddit in the last couple of weeks, there's been a couple funny threads where people are like, this is what LSAC likes to think about. Well, don't you think that adds to the confusion? It's right. Like, yeah, they talk about dinosaurs all the time. They talk about the environment. They talk about businesses and bad advertising and things like that. It's comical when it doesn't matter. But in this type of environment, it's frustrating and irritating. And I think everybody afterwards was like, which section was scored? This is kind of how I feel about this. Between the 225 LRs, I don't think we're really going to know precisely because of the movement around there. I can look at questions and say, all right, I feel like that whale echolocation question is real. I do think the 26 question section was real. And there's been a lot of confirmation from me where I'm like, I know this was in question, the 26 question one, and everybody has said that they had that. And usually when I say everybody, I don't mean everybody in the world. I mean people who I know who have taken this test before, who have a history with it, who are built to have good memories in terms of doing this.
Yeah. Here's my take on a good theory. It should have the ability to be invalidated. There should be a way to test and dismiss it, frankly. Otherwise it's just speculation, hypothetical, it doesn't matter. If it's a good theory, there should be a way to prove it wrong. And I think that 26 question LR, that's the opportunity here. Here's what I mean. If two people can say, like, I had the 26 question LR, so I had a 26 question LR, regardless of where it was on your test, if they can say, my first question was about seals, my first question was about vampires. No, I had seals first too, somebody chimes in. No, I had vampires first too. Oh wait, I had, Arctic ice. If we started to see that for the 26 question LR section, then we have a problem.
Agreed.
And all of that filtered through the idea that people's memories are notoriously spotty. But if you get 15 people all in there being like, I had that question too, and then another 15 like, I 100% did not see that in my 26, that's an issue.
You'd have to have a pretty big data pool agreeing on these various things.
Agreeing on disparity in that section.
Yeah, agreeing on the difference that's actually there.
But that, to me, is the testability of this.
Yeah, I think what you mean about a good theory is you can test it, not necessarily you can prove a good theory wrong.
No, disprove, though. It needs to have the ability to be invalidated.
It has to be able to be tested, yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the linchpin moment where you can look at that. I think this test had 101 questions. That's why I think the -12 scaling is really normal. To me, it looks like one of the 25 LR was real. The 26 LR was real as well. We know the games and the reading comp are real. So we're kind of set there.
Yeah.
But you think about these various theories that are out there, it's unusual. I don't recall, I'm thinking back a long time, obviously. I don't recall ever coming out of a test with this much uncertainty over what the heck just happened. And that's probably appropriate, given that this test is the first of its kind and really in many respects the only of its kind. It's an interesting thing that they've done here. I would love to be in their offices watching the data come in and seeing exactly how they respond to it, because if they have changed too many of the variables here, it's going to create problems for them. The best news, though, is one of the things we said in the crystal ball was when you walk in, expect this test to be normal. Now, aside from this weirdo LR scenario, the rest of this content looks really normal. And that's the biggest takeaway from all of this discussion. This test does not look like it was overly challenging. It looks like it was very reasonable, middle of the road. And that usually means decent scale, decent performance. And that should be the big takeaway, even though talking about all this LR stuff is, I think, pretty fun.
I think it's fun, too. It's certainly interesting. It's no fun being uncertain, and I've never felt this maybe off-kilter on the heels of a test. I said to you several times yesterday, like, this is by far the weirdest test day I think I've ever seen. Totally. Partly because of the format and the 50-50 and the uncertainty and the issues, but just watching people come out and not being able to pin this down right away.
And just some of the problems they had, the craziness. Well, it was just a completely nuts day as far as, like, having watched LSAT releases or, test days for years and years and years, this will go down as by far the most unusual, and I think in some respects, the most intense of all the days.
Yeah, I'm not sure you give enough credit.
You think it was worse than that?
No, I mean, I think just when you think LSAT can't do something weirder, prepare yourself.
All right, well, that's our discussion of the July 2019 Transitional Digital LSAT brought to you by LSAC. I don't have anything more to say. I think we said it all.
I'm running out.
All right, well,
what I'm terrified to do is to look at my email and Reddit and Twitter right now, because to take 2 hours off and talk, I might have just written my own death sentence.
I actually turned my phone over at one point. I could see the Twitter notifications coming in. I was like, no. But I'm off to Michigan this week. I'm going to go see the Struts a couple of times, so I am stoked to see them in Detroit. It's going to be good.
Yeah. Just leave me here in the trenches, taking grenades.
I'll be working on the plane, man.
I know you will.
All right. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Hope this was useful and interesting. If you do have questions about those theories, go to our forum. There is a thread there about the July test. Post there. We're happy to come in and see if we can give any extra insight. Also, if you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you may find it. Give us a rating and send us any questions that you have to lsat@powerscore.com or lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. On behalf of Jon and myself, thanks so much for listening. Have a great week.